Welcome back to Night Archive. In tonight's episode of Fall Asleep to the Unheard, we sail through the sounds of a whispering breeze, ushering in extraordinary tales of extraterrestrial encounters that may very well be unfamiliar to you. Allow the gentle wind to cradle you into slumber, and should something fall at the hands of the gust, don't hold me accountable. The Atlantic Radar Intrusion. In September 1976, Morocco found itself at a pivotal moment. The radar operator stood immobilized, astonished by a solid blip that suddenly materialized on his scope, swift, low-flying, and completely unexpected. He muttered into his headset, confirming a heading due west in a speed of 750 knots, anticipating that the contact would just as quickly diminish. Yet, contrary to his expectations, the signal intensified. Mere moments later, two additional targets emerged, flanking the first. What began as a mundane evening at Morocco's coastal radar station escalated into pandemonium. Voices rose in urgency over the communication lines. Multiple unidentified targets, devoid of transponders, were now heading northeast. By 11:15 in the evening, alarms blared at Quneitra Air Base. The thunderous roar of Mirage F-1 fighters surged from the tarmac, afterburners ablaze as they charged toward intruders that seemed to defy the realms of speed. The first indication appeared just after 11 o'clock on radar situated south of Rabat. The signal was anything but weak or diluted. It was clear, robust, and unmistakably structured. Controllers recognized it instantly as a legitimate aircraft. However, its movements eluded rational explanation. At one moment, it zipped along at phenomenal velocity, only to momentarily hover, almost motionless, before lunging ahead once again. Controllers accessed their records, noting the absence of any scheduled flights in that airspace, with no transponder codes registering. Soon, a second radar station corroborated the presence of this peculiar object. Then, a third. The cross-verification obliterated any hopes of dismissing it as equipment failure. Something was indeed lurking in the sky, executing maneuvers entirely beyond the capabilities of known aircraft. As operators remained glued to their screens, the radar display began to glow with more readings. By then, at least 4 unidentified echoes graced their monitors, at times flying in parallel trajectories, while at others veering sharply at right angles. Every echo was distinct, stable, and vigorous, transforming the usually tranquil Atlantic corridor into a veritable stage for the bizarre. Inside the command center, the duty officer made a decisive choice: scramble order. Within moments at Quneitra Air Base, pilots raced towards their Mirages. The Mirage F-1 stood as the crowning jewel of Morocco's Air Force: speed, agility, and a NATO standard fighter. If intruders dared to encroach upon Moroccan skies, it represented their finest asset. With relentless urgency, the afterburners painted the night sky with fiery light as the Mirages shot into the air, guided promptly by ground control intercept officers, directing them toward the enigmatic contacts. The pilots braced themselves for a confrontation with Soviet reconnaissance aircraft or possibly unregistered transport planes navigating the Atlantic airspace. Yet, what awaited was far beyond their preparedness. As the fighters approached, radar operators relayed updated locations. The pilots scrutinized the dark sky. One reported sighting a visual. Ahead, a dazzling light shimmered in the upper atmosphere, consistent and unwavering. He angled his plane toward it, rapidly closing the distance. However, just as he set himself for an intercept, the light darted across the heavens with instantaneous swiftness, disappearing from view within mere seconds. Still, his onboard radar maintained a lock on the target. Another pilot reported nearing what appeared to be a stationary light. As he approached, the object astonishingly split in two, with one fragment ascending sharply into the upper atmosphere, while the other plunged toward the ocean, evaporating from sight and from the radar entirely. These actions did not reflect the evasive strategies of conventional aircraft. Rather, they embodied a level of movement that belied the laws of physics. For nearly an hour, Moroccan pilots endeavored interception after interception. Radar controllers guided the fighters from one signal to another, yet time and again, the elusive targets evaded capture. At times, they appeared to hover like stars suspended in the Atlantic sky. At others, they veered off at angles no jet could ever hope to achieve. Ultimately, the pilots returned to base with fuel reserves nearly depleted. Frustration and anxiety underscored their debriefings as they shared accounts of brilliant lights, instantaneous accelerations, and phenomena that broke apart into multiple shapes. Radar operators corroborated their observations, with logs documenting strong returns tracked by several stations simultaneously. The Moroccan Air Force compiled a comprehensive report, preserving radar tapes along with recorded statements from the pilots and noted civilian sightings. The terminology employed was deliberate yet unmistakable, indicating that anomalous aerial phenomena had not only been detected on radar, but also visually confirmed. The intercepts, unfortunately, yielded no success, as the objects departed without any semblance of explanation. Though fundamentally a military occurrence, the night sky was also a canvas for civilian witnesses. Fishermen along the Atlantic coast reported radiant objects flitting across the horizon, while late-night drivers in Casablanca saw shining forms streaking silently overhead. The following morning, villagers along the coast exchanged tales of white stars that zipped too quickly to be planes. Their reports regarding timing and locations aligned perfectly with the radar tracks, adding gravitas to the military findings. Morocco's geopolitical position in 1976 held significant importance. United States forces maintained operation of communication facilities within the country, while NATO closely monitored the Atlantic corridor. Consequently, when Moroccan officials compiled their findings, the information swiftly moved beyond national jurisdictions. U.S. advisors stationed at Quneitra and Nouassour were briefed about the incidents, and American radar personnel admitted that they too had identified anomalies that night. Unobtrusive cables made their way to liaison offices in Madrid and Paris, confirming that the situation was taken with utmost gravity rather than brushed aside. In the tense atmosphere of the Cold War, unidentified trajectories represented a matter of significant concern. However, the behavior displayed comprised accelerations unforeseen within known capabilities. Vertical ascents into the atmosphere, followed by segmentation into multiple entities, rendered classification impossible. In the immediate aftermath, silence enveloped the incident. No press releases emerged, nor were there overt denials. Among Air Force circles, the narrative spread as hearsay, as pilots engaged in low murmurs about lights that surpassed conventional flight. But officially, the incident was quietly archived. The dossier, marked as unresolved, was subtly relayed to NATO contacts and then stored away in relative obscurity. To the public eye, no communication was made. Years hence, skeptics would propose that radar error was to blame. The Atlantic coast of Morocco often grapples with temperature inversions, phenomena capable of triggering anomalous returns. Yet, multiple independent stations captured the same solid signal concurrently, debunking theories of localized interference. Speculation also drifted towards U.S. military aircraft, potentially covert reconnaissance operations, but no known platform during 1976 possessed the ability to fragment into two entities, accelerate to the upper reaches of the atmosphere, or plunge into the deep ocean at supersonic velocities. The pilots, however, dismissed such notions, for they were well acquainted with radar anomalies. They understood the behaviors inherent to conventional jets. What they encountered and pursued, however, was anything but ordinary. The Atlantic radar intrusion aligned with another striking event, the Tiran dogfight of September 1976, wherein Iranian F-4 fighters attempted to intercept luminous objects hovering over Tiran. Those objects were similarly confirmed on radar, witnessed by pilots, and effortlessly evaded every attempt at interception. Throughout Europe, NATO radar installations intermittently flagged perplexing returns, usually disregarded as mere clutter. Morocco's incident, however, distinguished itself. Not just radar data, but pilots were dispatched into the night sky. Civilians on the ground corroborated their observations, and international allies were discreetly briefed. By the late 1970s, a coherent pattern had begun to take shape. luminous structured objects encroaching on regulated airspace, consistently recorded by radar, pursued by jets, and departing without explanation became the norm. For the Moroccan pilots, that night transcended mere folklore. It evolved into a legitimate operational mission. Armed, fueled, and propelled at high speeds, they returned without any prize, humbled before adversaries that evaded capture. For radar operators, that was a night that laid bare the limitations of their systems. Their screens confirmed that something tangible existed in the sky. Yet every interception culminated in disappointment. For Moroccan authorities, it presented a case they could never conclusively close. Their sole recourse was silence. On a September night in 1976, Morocco's skies hosted visitors unlike any seen before. Radar screens illuminated with impossible blips. Fighter jets roared into the ink-black expanse. Pilots witnessed lights that divided, ascended into the firmament, and dove into the sea. Civilian eyes lent credence to what military logs meticulously recorded. And then, as quickly as they had appeared, nothing remained. The objects evaporated from sight. The Atlantic radar intrusion endures today as one of the most compelling UFO occurrences in North Africa. It serves as a stark reminder that even in the most rigorously scrutinized Cold War airspace, phenomena emerged that eluded explanation by any pilot, radar, or command structure. They arrived, revealed themselves briefly, and departed, leaving in their wake only the unwavering truth that something extraordinary had traversed Moroccan airspace untouched by pursuit, denial, or understanding. The Boyani Mission Encounter took place on June 26, 1959, in Papua New Guinea. The Anglican missionary raised his hand toward the sky, and to the astonishment of nearly 40 witnesses, one of the figures aboard the hovering craft lifted its own hand and waved back. Gasps rippled through the assembly. Children clutched their parents for reassurance. Teachers exchanged whispers of disbelief, while nurses pointed skyward. Hovering above was a broad, disc-shaped craft, glowing brightly against the darkening horizon. 4 figures stood in silhouette on its deck, moving purposefully as if engaged in a task. What had begun as an inconceivable light in the sky had transformed into something profoundly stranger. Beings who appeared to acknowledge the people observing them from the ground. The evening commenced quietly, as Father William Booth Gill, an Anglican missionary from Melbourne overseeing the Boyani station, jotted down sermon notes when a bright object low on the horizon caught his eye. Initially, he presumed it to be Venus, that familiar planet often twinkling over Papua New Guinea. But then the light dipped, glided, and shifted in ways no star ever could. Intrigued, he called several others outside. Teachers from the mission school, nurses from the clinic, and villagers soon gathered, straining their necks to peer upward. As the object approached, its form became distinct. Witnesses recounted a broad metallic disc radiating a soft glow. Across the top, a flat surface emerged, illuminated just enough to reveal the silhouettes of 4 figures busily moving back and forth. Their motions were methodical. They bent, turned, and lifted their arms as if maneuvering unseen instruments. Their proportions resembled those of humans, not towering giants nor diminutive beings, but entities whose movements appeared deliberate and synchronized. The crowd remained riveted, every gaze fixed upon the enigmatic craft. Gill, composed yet profoundly curious, decided to ascertain whether the figures were aware of the audience below. Gradually, he raised his arm and waved. To his astonishment, one of the figures on board mirrored his gesture. Gasps erupted from the assemblage. Some pointed, others exchanged whispers. Encouraged by this response, Gill waved once more. Again, the figure reciprocated. Soon, others in the crowd began to wave as well, and the interaction unfolded over several minutes. It was not a fleeting illusion, nor a trick of light. Children beheld it, teachers witnessed it, nurses and villagers observed it. The beings on the deck were not merely visible, they engaged in a genuine exchange. Gill would later recall to their utter astonishment, one of the figures acknowledged their presence. We waved again, and the gesture was repeated. There was no doubt, whoever they were, they recognized our existence. For those fortunate enough to witness it, the experience was surreal. It was as if the chasm between earth and sky had momentarily bridged, closed by a simple act of humanity. The encounter unfolded over a span of nearly 45 minutes, providing ample opportunity for those present to not only witness the event, but also to articulate their observations as it transpired. Numerous smaller luminous orbs detached from the main craft, floating gracefully nearby before seamlessly rejoining. Gill characterized these entities as shuttles, maneuvering with deliberate precision, contrasting markedly with any semblance of erratic movement. Meanwhile, the figures stationed on the deck continued their actions. At times, they leaned forward, seemingly engaged in the operation of controls. At other moments, they stood composed, surveying their surroundings. The gesture of waving was repeated on multiple occasions, deliberate and measured, never frantic nor rushed. Finally, as twilight deepened around 7:30 in the evening, the craft began its ascent. The smaller luminescent objects converged back with the larger vessel, its brilliance waning as it climbed higher until it vanished among the celestial tapestry. At least 38 individuals witnessed the spectacle, a diverse assembly of mission staff, educators, medical professionals, villagers, and children. Each one recounted similar details: a disc-shaped craft, 4 figures discernible upon its upper deck, luminous orbs detaching and returning, along with the unmistakable waving exchange between those above and those below. Gill's own academic background lent significant credence to the accounts. Hailing from Melbourne and possessing a theological education, he was considered a reflective and well-informed individual, earning respect within his community for his rationality and restraint from flights of fancy. That night, his diary entries meticulously cataloged the incident, documenting precise timings, directions, and descriptions. Other witnesses echoed his narrative in writing. Educators elaborated on how the figures inclined forward as if engaged in specific tasks. A nurse corroborated the repeated motions of waving. The children recalled the feelings of wonder that swelled in the yard each time the beings raised their arms. The consistency and detail among nearly 40 witnesses is an exceptional rarity. In this instance, every narrative harmonized. That evening, the missionary buzzed with animated discussions, children mimicking the waves they had seen, adults conversing in hushed tones, while Gill assiduously transcribed the particulars in his diary. The following day, he set about compiling a formal report, which included sketches of the disc, the deck, and the figures aboard. This report traversed church channels until it reached the Australian administration in Papua New Guinea, eventually finding its way to the Royal Australian Air Force. The incident was not dismissed outright. Upon returning to Australia, Gill was debriefed by intelligence officers. His diary was subjected to scrutiny, his sketches reviewed, and other witnesses interrogated for their accounts. The official summary categorized the event as an unexplained aerial phenomenon observed by a considerable number of witnesses. There was no implication of fabrication. Rather, the case was quietly archived. Decades later, as researchers accessed declassified files, they were struck by the matter-of-fact nature of the investigation. This was not merely a rumor or folklore. It was a meticulously documented case preserved within government records. Over time, skeptics proposed alternative explanations. Some suggested the witnesses had confounded Venus with a craft. Yet, Venus does not hover low on the horizon, emit smaller objects, or exhibit humanoid figures gesturing in acknowledgement. Others posited the presence of an aircraft. However, in 1959, no plane or helicopter was capable of hovering silently for nearly an hour, especially one that could display individuals clearly visible on its deck. The theory of mass hallucination was also floated. Nevertheless, such hallucinations do not manifest collectively across nearly 40 individuals from varied backgrounds, all detailing their experiences independently in an aligned fashion. Each skeptical hypothesis faltered against the specifics of the case. The simplest resolution remained the testimony itself that the witnesses perceived precisely what they reported. For Gill, the encounter was far from threatening. He never characterized the figures as unwelcoming or hostile. On the contrary, he highlighted their familiarity. They appeared human, friendly, and employed gestures familiar to us. Whomever they were, they acknowledged us, just as we acknowledged them. This tranquil interpretation has consistently set the Boyani case apart. Unlike narratives rife with themes of abduction or terror, this recounting is one of recognition. Two disparate groups observed each other across the expanse of sky and waved. The Boyani Mission Encounter is distinct among UFO reports, not merely for the presence of lights in the firmament, but for the visible beings that graced its deck. This account was not an isolated incident. In Kentucky in 1955, families at Kelly recounted encounters with diminutive beings approaching their farmhouse amid a night of anxiety. In 1965 in Valençol, France, farmer Maurice Masse claimed to have observed two figures near a landed craft in his lavender field. In 1989 in Voron, within the Soviet Union, crowds of children and adults reported towering entities emerging from a landed craft in a city park. Each of these cases sparked controversy, yet all shared a pivotal theme. Occupants were not only seen, but in some instances interacted with the observers. What particularly distinguished Boyani was its clarity and composure. No chaos or panic marred the experience, merely a simple exchange of gestures witnessed by nearly 40 individuals. It illustrated that such encounters were not restricted to superpower territories or military installations. Rather, they could unfold in remote villages involving teachers, children, and missionaries, leaving behind a legacy of testimony that defied easy dismissal. The Boyani Mission Encounter remains one of the most lucid, enduring UFO cases of the 20th century. A disk hovered prominently before the eyes of nearly 40 witnesses. Figures stood upon its deck, moved with intention, and engaged in a mutual wave of recognition. The interaction was shared, calm, and beyond dispute. Perhaps that truth accounts for why this narrative endures, not through fear or mystique, but through the hushed silence that followed, the silence of a missionary where individuals gazed upwards in bemusement, of children reenacting the waves, of a missionary documenting the event with unwavering precision. For a single evening in 1959, earth and sky acknowledged one another. And as the craft ascended into the night, it left behind not confusion, but a profound certainty, a vivid memory, still unresolved and extraordinary. The Lotho Air Force Base incident in September 1995 unfolded in Maseru Leoto. The guard stationed at Maya Medellana Air Base shifted the weight of his rifle and rubbed the chill from his hands. The night was still. Crickets serenaded the dark grass beyond the fence, while a distant dog barked somewhere in the hills outside Maseru. Habitually, he lifted his gaze, scanning the horizon. That was when he noticed it. A luminous sphere hovered above the airbase's restricted zone. It glowed steadily, its surface pulsating gently with a whitish gold luminosity that seemed to inhale and exhale. Initially, he assumed it might be a South African helicopter that had wandered across the border. Yet, there was no sound of an engine, no telltale wash of rotor blades, nor any vibration in the evening air. The quietude of the night remained intact, making the sight all the more foreboding. He called over to the next sentry. Together, they stood transfixed, observing as the light glided sideways with an effortless fluidity that no flare or lantern could replicate. Then, almost as if by chance, a second orb materialized beside the first. Moments later, a third orb appeared. The three together formed a triangle suspended above the runways, as if the base itself had suddenly piqued their interest. The guards grew taut with anticipation. Beneath them, aircraft were lined up in the hangars, the sole air wing of Lotho, limited in number but critical in purpose. Nothing should have been hovering there without the proper clearance. One guard radioed the barracks. Within minutes, officers emerged, binoculars in hand. They lifted the lenses to their eyes, peering skyward, but fell into a profound silence. The three orbs pulsed gently, their lights ebbing and flowing rhythmically like a beating heart. Occasionally, one orb would drift ahead, only for the others to follow in seamless synchronization. Then, without warning, all three orbs stood completely still, suspended against the night sky. To men trained in the observation of aircraft movements, the precision was unmistakable. These were not meteors, nor flares, nor drifting lanterns. They appeared to be holding formation with deliberate purpose. Witnesses would later estimate the diameter of each orb to be between 1 and 2 meters. The light they emitted, while not blinding, was strong enough to cast a pale white glow over the concrete runway. The hangar doors glimmered subtly in this otherworldly illumination. One mechanic remarked that the radiance was so intense it made his tools shine as if illuminated by a lamp. Then came the descent of 2 of the orbs, lowering themselves until they hovered barely 100 meters off the ground. Their glow intensified, compelling some guards to shield their eyes against the harsh brightness. One officer whispered that it felt as though the lights were scanning the base, scrutinizing every structure and every soldier. Meanwhile, the hills surrounding Masru bore witness to the spectacle as civilians watched with growing unease. Farmers attending to their late-night cattle pointed skyward. Families lounging outside their homes mistook the lights for stars until they noticed how they shifted, forming triangles and lines. Some likened them to searchlights, though no beams illuminated the ground below. A taxi driver would later swear he saw the glow reflecting off his vehicle's roof, turning the metal a ghostly white. Multiple villagers remarked on how their cattle froze in the fields, their shadows stretching unnaturally long beneath the hovering orbs. Children clung to their parents, sobbing and asking what the bright suns were doing above the city's skyline. The scene beyond the base was as vivid as the turmoil within it. Tension escalated as the base commander convened with his officers. Should they scramble the few fighter planes on standby? The idea was discussed, then quickly set aside. The lights were too swift, too erratic. To engage them might result in humiliation, or worse, destruction. Instead, ground patrols were dispatched. Soldiers maneuvered cautiously along the perimeter fencing, rifles slung at their sides, their gazes fixed skyward. Over the radios, reports crackled with urgency. 2 objects moving west, remaining in a steady hover, still silent. Wherever the patrols repositioned, the orbs continued to remain directly overhead, seemingly undisturbed by human activity. The luminous display persisted for nearly an hour. Guards checked their watches meticulously, some lighting cigarettes to steady their nerves. The lights above flared brighter, dimmed again, then brightened once more. Then, without a moment's notice, the extraordinary display abruptly ceased. In the blink of an eye, the orbs shot upward, vanishing into the night sky, swiftly shrinking from brilliant spheres to faint pinpricks of light, and then disappearing entirely. The sky reverted to the familiar expanse over Lotho, clear, silent, and extraordinarily mundane. The following morning, a buzz of unease permeated the base. Pilots who had been off-duty clamored for explanations regarding the events of the previous night. Mechanics insisted the hangars had glowed with an ethereal white light. Guards confessed openly that they had clutched their rifles yet felt utterly powerless. "We had weaponry," one said later, "but what good were they against lights that behaved in such a way?" Reports were meticulously documented. The commander crafted a careful summary for the Ministry of Defense. Unidentified aerial lights observed above the base perimeter, movements indicative of intelligence, duration prolonged, lacking any conventional explanation. The phrasing was measured and factual. Civilians, however, allowed themselves no such restraint. Taxi drivers recounted tales to their passengers about the white stars that descended from the sky. Farmers narrated how their cattle stood frozen under the glow. One woman remarked how her children cried throughout the night, convinced that the orbs were spirits visiting the capital from beyond. Rumors quickly proliferated, retold in markets and homes, until the narrative gathered its own momentum. Soon enough, South African newspapers caught wind of the events. The Star out of Johannesburg reported on the strange aerial objects hovering over Masru, referencing sources from the Lotho Air Force. The details remained scant. The government offered no further commentary, stating only that lights had been observed, yet the consistency of accounts was striking. Guards, officers, villagers, and civilians uniformly described the same phenomenon: spherical lights, silent and glowing steadily, maneuvering in perfect formation before vanishing upwards with impossible speed. One officer confided in private that he had contemplated scrambling the base's fighter planes, but ultimately reconsidered. "We would have subjected ourselves to embarrassment," he remarked. "They were swifter than anything in our arsenal." Our only option was to watch. For a base entrusted with the task of safeguarding the nation's airspace, that realization was sobering. In the days that followed, investigators from the Ministry of Defense arrived quietly to conduct inquiries. Guards were interrogated. Officers were requested to draw sketches of what they had witnessed. Some men recalled being shown radar logs, though they were never privy to the results. Soil samples were gathered beyond the perimeter, yet no official report ever surfaced. Amidst this, the legend thrived among the local populace. Children shared tales of the white suns with their educators. Farmers passionately debated whether these entities were spirit beings or mechanical constructs. Elders proclaimed it a portent, a sign of impending events. Others proposed it was a visitation, tangible proof that the heavens contained more than mere human ingenuity could conjure. Within the base's confines, the incident became a topic fit for whispers rather than spoken aloud, yet it remained indelible in their collective memory. Pilots exchanged nervous banter, remarking that the orbs commanded control over Lycido's airspace far better than they could. The mechanics recounted how the hangars gleamed as if illuminated by floodlights. Sentinels confessed to feelings of impotence, their rifles seeming useless in the face of what they had witnessed. Skeptics suggested that flares were responsible, but no flare could hover in absolute silence for the span of an hour or execute maneuvers in formation. Others speculated about helicopters crossing from South Africa, yet those machines were known for their cacophony, and there had been no sounds to accompany the lights. Proposals of meteors surfaced, but meteors do not stall mid-air, pulse rhythmically, and then ascend into the heights. For those men who stood under that celestial display, such theories held no weight. They were witnesses to something undeniably real, something that defied convention. The Lotto Air Force maintained its reticence after its initial acknowledgement. There were no press conferences, no further disclosures, no attempts at clarification. A thick shroud of silence enveloped the event as if it had never occurred. Yet, memories lingered. Families nestled in the hills recalled the soft glow illuminating their fields. Children held onto memories of fear reflected on their parents' faces. Taxi drivers found their passengers craning their necks to glimpse the lights, while soldiers stood on the tarmac of their nation's solitary airbase, gazing upward at luminescent forms that defied logic. The Lotho Air Force Base incident endures as one of Southern Africa's most compelling UFO accounts. A night when both military personnel and civilians beheld the same astonishing spectacle, with no authoritative explanation forthcoming. The lights arrived without forewarning, hovering over a facility tasked with the protection of the airspace. They lingered just long enough to ink themselves into memory. And just like that, they departed, dissolving into the quiet. For Lotto, the narrative has transformed into mere rumor, passed down gently through stories in the years that have unfolded, undocumented in official records. But for those present, guards equipped with binoculars, villagers toiling in their fields, children perched on their doorsteps, it remains vivid, undeniable, and unresolved. The Lotho Air Force Base incident does not stand as a singular event. Globally, similar occurrences resonate with the same pattern: silent orbs hovering over sensitive military installations, moving with precision in formation and disappearing abruptly into the ethereal. In Norway's Hesteland Valley, illuminated spheres have been observed and studied for decades. In Australia, the Min Min lights continue to intrigue travelers throughout the outback. In Texas, the Marfa lights make regular appearances, inviting investigation yet eluding explanation. Moreover, in recent times, even the most advanced military forces have conceded the presence of objects traversing restricted airspace that eludes rational description. That such an extraordinary event transpired not solely over the territories of superpowers, but also above a small landlocked nation with a singular airbase speaks volumes. The unknown recognizes no boundaries, technological advantages, or might. The lights that manifested above Miseru in 1995 joined a broader global family of unexplained happenings. They hovered, observed, then departed, and, like so many others, they left silence in their wake, a poignant reminder that the enigma of the skies does not belong exclusively to the powerful, but to all who dwell beneath the vast expanse above. Perhaps that is the reason the tale persists. Not due to official reports or news headlines, but rather because of the enveloping silence that ensued, the silence of armed men rendered powerless, of families mere observers, of a government that had no answers to provide. What endures is memory, the glow above the only airbase of a small nation, that lingering uneasy awareness that for one night the skies were no longer under their dominion. The Lake Tangana object in August 1966 near Mwangu in what is now northern Rhodesia or Zambia. The southern edge of Lake Tangana during August can feel as if it stretches endlessly. The waters lay smooth and silvery blue beneath the mid-morning sun. The fishing communities lining its shores rise early, their daily rhythms interwoven with the lake's moods. By mid-morning, the sounds of paddles breaking the surface, the hauling of nets, and the soft murmur of conversations drift heavily over the water. John Mua, a 34-year-old fisherman from a small settlement west of Mapulong, had been out for hours alongside his cousin, Daniel. As they rowed back toward the shore after tending to their last gill net, an unusual sight on the horizon captured John's attention. At first, it seemed merely a reflection, a brief flash of brilliance low over the water and slightly northward from their location. The air hung still, and the lake's surface resembled glass. John paused, letting his paddle rest against the gunwale while he gazed. The flash re-emerged, more persistent this time, as though a solid form caught the sun's rays. Daniel noticed it too. Not a boat, John thought quietly while shielding his eyes with his hand. Whatever this object was, it appeared to hover just above the lake's surface, characterized by its pale metallic appearance and oval shape, glinting in the sunlight. There was no mast, no wake, and no engine noise. The two men floated, engrossed in silence. Gradually, the object began to advance toward them, moving smoothly and purposefully, covering the distance without any apparent means of propulsion. As it approached, John estimated its length to be around 20 feet, crowned with a central dome-like rise. Light flickered softly across its surface, resembling a dull sheen, not quite polished, but more akin to something coated in a matte finish. Once it was about 200 meters away, the object decelerated and hovered, remaining suspended in the air. The water beneath it shivered in an unusual circular pattern, the ripples radiating outward in steady rings. A soft hum then emerged, low and persistent, hovering just at the limits of perception. Suddenly, and without warning, the object descended to make contact with the lake's surface. The ripples grew more pronounced, yet they refrained from breaking into splashes. The craft appeared to rest upon the water with the delicacy of a leaf settling down. John and Daniel exchanged glances, a shared bewilderment evident in their eyes. Neither had encountered anything resembling this before. They commenced paddling slowly towards it, the unease between them steadily deepening. Even when they maintained a distance of approximately 100 meters, the hum escalated sharply in pitch. The craft smoothly ascended from the water, rising vertically to roughly 30 meters above the lake, before abruptly angling upward and shooting away at an impressive speed. In mere seconds, it had vanished. As the last echoes of the sound dissipated, both men turned their attention to the water's surface where the object had floated. The circular ripples continued to spread, yet at the center of the disturbance, the water appeared unnaturally clear, as though something had stirred the silt, revealing an observable column beneath the surface. By the time John and Daniel made it back to shore, rumors had already begun to circulate. Other fishermen along the bank reported having witnessed parts of the event, although most had only glimpsed either the hovering craft or its swift departure. That afternoon, the local police in Mulong were alerted. Sergeant Elias Chanda, who was on duty, gathered reports from both men, and made rough sketches of the object based on their detailed descriptions. The incident was documented in triplicate. One copy remained at the local precinct, another was dispatched to the provincial office in Kasama, and a third was sent off to Lusaka. A week later, 2 officials from the Northern Rhodesian Department of Civil Aviation arrived in Mulongo. They introduced themselves quietly, examined the police records, and conducted interviews with John, Daniel, and 3 other fishermen who claimed they had observed the craft from a distance. The officials also visited the section of the lake where the sighting occurred. However, they withheld any conclusions before departing. In October of that year, a brief memorandum touching on the Mulong incident was forwarded to the British Colonial Office in London. This memo, which would later surface in declassified archives, deemed the witnesses credible and experienced in their maritime activities. It labeled the object as unidentified, noting that no corresponding aviation or maritime traffic was recorded around the time of the incident. The report advised that the file remain open pending further correlations with regional aerial reports. For the villagers along the lakeshore, the incident became a topic of quiet conversation, discussed in subdued tones at the marketplace or while making their way back from fishing excursions. A few younger fishermen jested about skyboats and spirits, yet those who had witnessed the event spoke plainly, avoiding embellishment. Months drifted by without additional sightings. Fishing habits resumed their normal patterns, and the memory of the ripples began to gently fade. Yet for John, that moment left an indelible mark. He had dedicated his life to interpreting the lake's signs, weather fluctuations, and the behaviors of fish, as well as the meanings woven into the light on the water. None of that knowledge explained what he had witnessed. Years later, in the mid-1970s, a visiting researcher from South Africa, conducting a survey of UFO reports across Africa, stumbled upon the file while poring over police archives in Kasama. He traced John, who still resided near Mapalong, and discovered that his recollection remained unchanged in all its fundamental aspects. The shape, the motion, the sound, and the absence of visible means of propulsion all aligned with his initial account. When 2005 rolled around, portions of the British Colonial Office's archives were digitized and made accessible to the public. This included the brief memorandum concerning the incident, awkwardly yellowed with age and featuring the original police sketches that illustrated the object's oval shape and dome. In the margin, an anonymous clerk had penned a handwritten note that simply stated, "No match." Leave unresolved. The Lake Tangana sighting never garnered headlines beyond the local region, remaining tucked away in an obscure file, its intricacies largely known only to those who study such occurrences with diligence. Yet, it stands as one of the singularly documented African UFO cases from that era, with both local witness accounts and formal governmental documentation. For those familiar with the lake, the notion of something appearing silently over its waters, departing without leaving a physical trace, but rather an imprint on memory, resonates deeply. The fishermen who had observed the sighting never sought recognition or answers. They merely recounted the event and left the remainder to the officials. The officials, in turn, relegated the case to their files. Now, decades later, the lake remains unchanged in its vastness, morning light still dancing upon the ripples in ways that deceive the eye. But somewhere in a locked cabinet, an old manila folder preserves a simple and unresolved account. 2 fishermen, an enigmatic craft, and a fleeting moment when the familiar surface of Tangana reflected something extraordinary. The Kikura Lights. December 31st, 1978, near Kikura, South Island, New Zealand. The skies above New Zealand's South Island were tranquil on New Year's Eve in 1978. High above the dark coastline near Kura, a Safe Air Argosy cargo aircraft executed its routine southbound journey toward Christchurch. The route was well known to both crew and airline, serving as a quiet, reliable connection between the islands. However, this night held a different significance aboard the aircraft. In addition to the 2 pilots in the cockpit, a small television news crew had positioned their cameras within the rear cabin. Reporter Dennis Grant, cameraman Quentin Fogarty, and sound operator Ingrid McGee diligently documented the area following a series of peculiar aerial sightings reported along the coast in preceding weeks. They had arrived equipped to capture the vast empty night sky and to interview the crew, wholly unprepared for their equipment to record anything extraordinary in real time. At the helm was Captain Bill Startup, a veteran pilot boasting a wealth of experience in both commercial and military aviation. Next to him, First Officer Bob Guard expertly handled navigation and radio communications. Their flight, initially unremarkable, took a startling turn as they soared over the dark expanse of water east of the South Island. Suddenly, Startup noticed a light flickering low on the horizon to the right of the aircraft. Brighter than any star and unwavering against the night canvas, it did not resemble the gentle, swaying illumination of a fishing vessel, nor the sporadic blinks of a navigation beacon. This light appeared anchored in place. Yet, as their argosy progressed, it began to synchronize its pace with them. Startup directed Guard's attention to the phenomenon, and upon confirmation that his first officer could indeed see it, they contacted Wellington Air Traffic Control, seeking a radar check. The controller's unexpected response sent a ripple of intrigue through the cockpit. Radar had also detected an unknown contact in their vicinity, corresponding precisely with the location the pilots had relayed. The radar return was unambiguous, maintaining its position alongside the aircraft. In the cabin, Fogarty adjusted his camera, pressing it closer to the window as the luminous object remained in tow. Through the lens, it sometimes took on the appearance of a perfect sphere of white, while at other moments it elongated slightly into an ellipse, surrounded by a soft halo of light. For several minutes, the object sustained its place, glowing steadily. Then, with an abruptness that sent pulses of excitement coursing through the crew, it surged ahead. The acceleration was both smooth and purposeful, propelling it in front of the argosy before descending briefly toward the ocean, only to ascend again in a gentle climb. Air traffic control confirmed that the radar target appeared to have executed the same maneuver described by the pilots. Almost immediately after, a second light materialized on the left, smaller yet equally brilliant, as it emerged from the shadows over the water. As it neared, it seemed to hover just over a mile away, its luminescence bright enough to illuminate the cockpit's edges and cast a faint glow on the instrument panels. Startup and Guard exchanged swift, astonished glances. They had amassed thousands of hours of flying experience between them, yet neither had ever encountered anything of this nature. Meanwhile, the news crew continued their relentless filming, grappling with the challenges of nighttime shots through the aircraft windows. The resulting footage would later reveal glowing forms that pulsed, morphed, and occasionally appeared shrouded in a soft haze. As the argosy steadily approached Christchurch, the enigmatic lights would momentarily fade from view, only to re-emerge miles away, sometimes pacing alongside the aircraft, other times darting ahead or shifting to one side. Every appearance was corroborated by radar operators, whose screens displayed sudden accelerations and sharp stops that no conventional aircraft could replicate. The flight concluded without incident, yet the atmosphere on the ground was palpably charged. Crew members, journalists, and controllers alike understood they had witnessed something out of the ordinary. The footage reels were promptly secured, and within hours, prints began to be developed. Soon after, the Royal New Zealand Air Force was informed of the astonishment that had unfolded. In light of the recent uptick in sightings around the area, the RNZAF approached the report with gravity. Officers were dispatched to interview the pilots, the news crew, and the radar operators from both Wellington and Christchurch. They requested copies of the raw film, radar logs, and the positional data from the flight. Startup and Guard described the objects as large, intensely brilliant, and capable of rapid directional changes. They noted the absence of any navigation lights or transponder signals, asserting that the maneuvers of the lights appeared too deliberate to be attributed to drifting balloons or any natural phenomena. The television crew's testimony aligned perfectly with that of the pilots in every regard. Quentin Fogarty articulated the difficulty of maintaining focus on the lights due to their erratic movements, yet their brightness rendered them impossible to entirely lose track of. Dennis Grant supported this, emphasizing that the lights never resembled any ordinary aircraft. Their sudden accelerations and sharp directional shifts clearly defied conventional explanations. Air traffic controllers presented equally clear narratives. In Wellington, radar tracked a target keeping pace with the Argosy for nearly 20 minutes before it surged ahead and vanished from scope. In Christchurch, multiple unidentified radar returns appeared in the approach corridor, materializing and disappearing in unison with the pilot's reports. When the RNZAF reviewed the film, photographic analysts determined that the variations in the shapes of the lights were genuinely consistent with real changes in the source, rather than mere camera or lens effects. Weather data was scrutinized, revealing no atmospheric conditions that could cause simultaneous radar and visual observations as described. In their internal summary, the RNZAF documented the multiple visual and radar contacts observed by trained professionals on 31 December 1978 in the Kura area. Notably, they reported no known aircraft movements in the region at the relevant times, while the observed performance exceeded the capabilities of known aviation assets. Public interest skyrocketed in the aftermath. Newspaper headlines blared about the Kikura UFOs, and television broadcasts featured segments of the footage capturing the strange lights dancing over the Black Sea. Some skeptics put forth explanations ranging from Venus to fishing vessels or reflections off the aircraft's deck. Yet, those explanations faltered in the face of the comprehensive witness testimonies and the corroborating radar data tracking objects moving independently in open airspace. The Kura lights did not occur in isolation. Merely 10 days prior, on the 21st of December, another Argosy had reported bright, unexplained lights along the same flight route, which had also been tracked on radar. This earlier sighting prompted the television crew to accompany the New Year's Eve flight, the very one that unexpectedly generated the now iconic film footage. In the ensuing months, the footage permeated through circles of researchers across Australia, the United States, and Europe. Many considered it among the most compelling UFO incidents of the late 20th century, not due to the clarity of the light's nature, but thanks to an exceptional convergence of trained eyewitnesses, multiple radar validations, and documentation, captured by professionals during the event itself. The lights, however, never reappeared in such a pronounced manner. A handful of reports trickled in from Kikura in subsequent years, yet none encompassed the same blend of support from Startup Guard and the television crew. That night solidified itself in memory, a routine flight abruptly metamorphosed into an encounter defying logical explanation from the instant it unfolded. The South Island coastline eventually reclaimed its usual tranquility, with night flights resuming their monotonous routes. The waters below were merely speckled with the steady illumination of fishing vessels. Yet for those aboard the Argus, both in the cabin and the cockpit on that fateful New Year's Eve, the vivid recollections of luminescent, maneuverable objects tracking their aircraft, alongside the reassuring presence of radar to substantiate the sighting, remained indelibly etched in their minds. The Kikura lights continued to stand out in the historical narrative of New Zealand aviation as a singular instance where the mysterious was not only observed, but also documented and corroborated. The film footage, the logs, and the interviews still exist, each fragment of evidence supporting the others. Despite the passage of decades, the lights above Kikura remain shrouded in mystery, eluding any definitive explanation. They persist as they did that night, brilliant points of light against a vast, dark canvas, navigating with an intent that seemed known solely to them. Shifting now to the Longford Bridge sighting in September 1976, situated over the Coventry Canal in Warwickshire, England. During the mid-70s, Longford Bridge was an unremarkable crossing, bordered by hedges, dimly lit street lamps, and the muted buzz of late-night traffic drifting along the nearby A44. Yet nothing suggested it would transform into a quietly chronicled UFO incident rooted in the anxieties of the Cold War era. On a September evening in 1976, Michael Hughes, a 27-year-old delivery driver hailing from Bedworth, was traveling home after wrapping up his last delivery in Nanette. The lanes were clear, the night air cool, and the earthy scent of damp soil lingered following a brief rain earlier that evening. As he neared the turnoff for Longford Bridge, he detected a peculiar glow ahead. It was not the harsh glare from headlights. Instead, it was a gentler illumination floating above the canal. Initially, Hughes surmised it was the reflection from floodlights of a neighboring industrial lot. However, as he drew nearer, the light appeared to be self-sustained, lacking any visible source on the ground. Slowing his van, he pulled to the side just before the bridge and stepped outside. The light hovered approximately 30 feet above the surface of the water, steady and bright white, with a subtle bluish sheen along its edge. Its form was hard to discern at first until it tilted slightly, revealing a disc-like shape roughly the size of a small automobile. Below it, a soft column of light extended towards the water's surface, its rippling resembling the distortion of a heat haze. Hughes recalled that beneath the luminous column, the canal water shimmered oddly, despite the night's stillness. For several seconds, everything remained motionless. Then, without warning, the object glided silently across the canal, passing directly overhead. He felt a tingling pressure in the air, not painful, yet enough to raise the hairs on his arms. As Hughes remained transfixed, another vehicle approached from the opposite direction. The driver, a middle-aged woman named Jean Turner, slowed almost to a standstill upon witnessing the light. They exchanged a fleeting glance, yet spoke not a word. Both were captivated by the phenomenon. The disk advanced towards the eastern bank, pausing above a cluster of willow trees before ascending vertically. Hughes estimated it rose to about 200 feet before accelerating away at an angle, vanishing toward the south in less than 5 seconds. Shaken, he returned to his van and headed home, but restful slumber eluded him. The following morning, spurred by curiosity, he opted to telephone the local police station, not to file an official report, but rather to inquire if anyone else had seen strange lights the night prior. He was taken aback when the desk sergeant did not dismiss his question out of hand. Instead, the sergeant informed Hughes that a patrol car in nearby Shawl had also reported an unusual aerial light at an analogous time, described as moving too swiftly and erratically to be an aircraft. This inquiry resulted in a detailed interview later that same day with a uniformed officer who recorded Hughes' account meticulously. The officer mentioned that the Ministry of Defense occasionally reviewed such sightings, though feedback was seldom forthcoming. Weeks later, through a friend working at the Coventry Telegraph, Hughes discovered that someone else had witnessed the object, Jean Turner, the motorist from the other vehicle. She had relayed a strikingly similar description to the paper, illustrating it as hanging silently in the air, devoid of sound or movement, showing no sign of acknowledgement that they were witnessing it, before vanishing in an instant. The article was never published. Rather, it was discreetly forwarded to RAF Cosford, which managed certain aerial incident inquiries for the area. From that juncture, the trail seemed to evaporate. Hughes continued with his daily life, occasionally narrating the sighting to friends, but never pursuing it any further. Turner, by all accounts, appeared less inclined to publicly engage with the incident. Behind the scenes, however, the Longford Bridge case quietly gained documentation through a series of internal Ministry of Defense memos, fragments of which eventually surfaced decades later through requests made under the Freedom of Information Act. The released pages, heavily redacted, confirmed that an unidentified aerial phenomenon had been reported by 2 independent civilian witnesses on the night in question. The document, moreover, hints at a potential connection with 2 additional visual accounts from the West Midlands that same evening, although specifics remain minimal. One paragraph particularly captures attention. There was an absence of radar verification from RAF Knightishead, or RAF Bulmer, regarding the phenomenon, which had been witnessed at close quarters, demonstrating stable hovering and vertical ascent devoid of any detectable acoustic signature. No applicable meteorological explanations could elucidate the event. Labeled as unexplained, the mid-1970s marked a dynamic era for UFO reports across Britain, with the majority of incidents remaining under the radar of public awareness. The Ministry of Defense operated what it termed the Defense Intelligence Staff UFO Desk, a diminutive department dedicated to the collection and categorization of reports sourced from police, RAF stations, and, on occasion, the general public. Although numerous sightings faced swift dismissal as instances of aircraft meteors or atmospheric phenomena, those involving multiple observers, structured crafts, or unconventional maneuvers merited more comprehensive documentation. RAF Ford, the received site for the Longford Bridge case, not only acted as a training facility but also served as a regional center for assessing aerial incident reports, especially when a sighting was deemed credible yet lacked an immediate explanation. Cosford's operational protocol dictated an analysis of any defense significance, fundamentally probing whether the sighted object could signify foreign aircraft or technology. In cases where no threat was discerned, the protocol typically concluded the incident without further inquiry. The absence of radar corroboration from prominent stations such as Nidus Head and Bulmer compelled the Ministry of Defense to categorize the sighting as having no defense significance. This did not indicate a negation of the event's occurrence, but rather a lack of identifiable military threat. This method of classification often resulted in the finalization of cases, regardless of the robustness of visual accounts. The intrigue surrounding the Longford Bridge sighting is magnified by its geographic proximity to Coventry's industrial perimeter, an area housing several defense contractors during the 1970s. Additionally, its location aligned with a low-altitude flight path occasionally utilized by military helicopters. Thus, it is noteworthy that both witnesses emphatically reported the object producing no sound, not even the slightest hint of rotor blades. The subsequent day, according to another redacted memo, 2 plainclothes personnel paid a visit to the site. Hughes, during his commute across the bridge, observed their presence by the canal with measuring instruments in tow. One individual seemed to be recording measurements close to the waterline, while the other sketched the bridge's structure. They refrained from approaching him, and Hughes did not halt for a conversation. Residents later noted that for several nights ensuing, a small patrol vessel navigated that segment of the canal, although its connections to the incident remained unclear. Such discreet site visits were characteristic of the Ministry of Defense. They occasionally dispatched teams to examine areas for physical evidence such as soil irregularities, magnetic interference, or radiation anomalies. During the 1970s, these teams sometimes utilized portable Geiger counters, compasses to gauge magnetic deviations, and Polaroid cameras to capture documentation of the site. However, if any such data were collected at Longford Bridge, it never surfaced in the declassified file. By the early 2000s, when the Ministry of Defense files were finally made accessible to the public through the Freedom of Information Act, the Longford Bridge incident had largely slipped from common memory. Buried among more sensational encounters, it garnered scant attention outside the local sphere. Nevertheless, for those well-versed in British close encounters from the 1970s, its amalgamation of low-altitude observation, numerous witnesses, and apparent interest from the Ministry of Defense composes a compelling narrative. The final notation in the file, dated late October 1976, contains a succinct closing remark asserting that no additional investigation was deemed necessary, rating the witness credibility as elevated and indicating that the object's behavior lacked a satisfactory explanation. Presently, the bridge persists in its unremarkable state, a simple passage over tranquil waters with vehicles continuing their steady flow in both directions. There exists no commemorative plaque, no burgeoning local folklore, no remnants of a lingering public narrative. Yet for 2 drivers on that placid September night in 1976, it transformed into the backdrop for an encounter subtly relegated to the category of the unexplained. The official documentation may have condensed the incident to a mere paragraph in statistical entry, but for Hughes and Turner, their sighting constituted an immediate and irrefutable event, a bright, soundless object remaining where no traditional aircraft should have found itself maneuvering in ways beyond any aircraft they had encountered. Decades later, the government's documentation still communicates more in what it omits than in what it discloses, leaving this incident as yet another unresolved fragment within Britain's understated history of UFO phenomena. The Calvine photograph, captured on August 4th in 1990, presents another layer to this persistent mystery. Nestled within the Highlands of Scotland, near the village of Calvine, the landscape evokes a tranquil, almost timeless aura. Rolling hills dissolve beneath the somber gray heavens, embodying a seclusion rarely disturbed. This setting is precisely what renders the occurrence on August 4, 1990, so remarkable, emerging from obscurity in a locale typically devoid of notable events. To this day, the incident remains shrouded in enigma. Two men, whose identities remain cloaked in public records, were trekking just north of Calvine along the A9 road. One carried a camera while they made their way toward a remote lodge when they spotted something peculiar aloft in the sky. A sizable diamond-shaped object, exhibiting metallic traits, hovered silently just above the treetops. Its surface refracted the early evening light, not with the sheen of polished metal, but rather with a subtle glow resembling that of lightly oxidized aluminum. It made no sound and emitted no exhaust. However, it was not alone. Accompanying it were two quick-moving military jets, later recognized as RAF Harriers, based on their distinctive shape and configuration. The jets maneuvered around the object, circling it with deliberate grace, barely straying from the vicinity. The object did not dodge or accelerate. It remained stationary, suspended in the atmosphere as if defying weight, propulsion, and the laws of gravity itself. The witnesses crouched behind some foliage, capturing 6 photographs of the inexplicable incident. The film later unveiled a particularly striking frame, one that captured the diamond object alongside an RAF jet, a composition that would ultimately be referred to as the Calvine photograph. The men, grappling with the uncertain nature of what they had witnessed, entrusted the negatives to the Daily Record, a Scottish tabloid renowned for its eclectic coverage ranging from political scandals to local lore. Subsequently, a journalist from the publication reached out to the Ministry of Defense seeking an official comment, yet none was forthcoming. Instead, the photograph, alongside its negatives and accompanying report, was confiscated, never to be printed. The witnesses remained nameless, and the photograph receded from public consciousness for over 3 decades. At that time, the Ministry of Defense operated a discrete unit dedicated to monitoring reports of unidentified aerial phenomena, though documents still referred to them as UFOs. Later, Nick Pope, a former Ministry of Defense staffer who had worked within the Secretariat Air Staff 2A, responsible for such reports, revealed that the Calvine case warranted serious consideration, at least within the confines of closed-door discussions. Internally, officials characterized the image as one of the clearest daylight photographs of a UFO ever submitted to the ministry, and a large print was reportedly displayed prominently on a wall within Whitehall for intelligence analysts, air staff, and senior personnel to scrutinize. Speculation about the craft's origins abounded. While some proposed it might be an advanced American reconnaissance vehicle, others maintained a note of skepticism, yet no definitive explanation was put forth. The broader public would likely have remained oblivious to the Calvine photograph had it not been for 2 pivotal events. First, in the year 2009, the British government began a gradual declassification of its UFO files, responding to mounting pressure and under the auspices of the Freedom of Information Act. Among the thousands of documents released was a reference to a UFO photograph taken near Calvine in 1990, duly logged and investigated, but ultimately filed away without any elaboration. The second critical development occurred in the year 2022, when Craig Lindsay, a former press officer of the RAF, chose to come forward with a copy of the photograph he had preserved since handling the incident in 1990. This first-generation print, clear and detailed, showcased precisely what the original witnesses had reported: a diamond-shaped object hovering in the sky, with a Harrier jet visible in the background. The image was publicized by Dr. David Clarke, a UK-based investigative journalist and historian who had devoted years to studying the case, who heralded it as the most remarkable UFO photograph ever sent to the Ministry of Defense, a release that reawakened widespread intrigue. Despite this renewed interest, the originals remained elusive, and the Ministry of Defense offered no further commentary. In 2001, the ministry maintained that it held no stance regarding the origin or authenticity of the Calvine image and stated that the file had been closed. However, documents unveiled through FOIA requests painted a different picture. A memo from 1993 expressed apprehensions that public release of the photograph could incite unnecessary panic if lacking proper context. It also acknowledged that while the object was still unidentified, there was no indication of hostility or threat. Consequently, the photograph was to be sealed for 30 years, a period later extended to 50. Initially slated for release in 2021, the National Archives withheld the negatives until at least 2017, citing concerns related to privacy and defense. No rationale for the delay was offered. Among enthusiasts of unidentified flying phenomena and defense analysts, the Calvine incident became a significant focal point, not solely for what was depicted, but also for the manner in which it faded from public discourse. Speculation arose that the object could be associated with a clandestine American military project, such as the rumored Aurora high-speed reconnaissance aircraft. However, critics pointed out that such a craft would unlikely hover in silence and would not be tested publicly over Scotland without coordination from the RAF. An alternative theory linked Calvine to a series of sightings of triangular and diamond-shaped objects throughout the United Kingdom during the late 1980s and early 1990s, a time characterized by Cold War tensions, experimental aircraft testing, and a burgeoning civilian fascination with classified technology. What rendered Calvine distinct was not merely the photograph itself. It encompassed the intertwining elements of military engagement, official confiscation, trails of FOIA requests, and the striking absence of any plausible explanation, even decades later. The two witnesses, the identities of whom remain a mystery, have never been made publicly known. According to Lindsay, the RAF press officer who initially received the negatives, they appeared to be respectable, serious men who seemed genuinely taken aback by their experience. There were no indications of deceit or fabrication. Demonstrably, they did not seek attention or financial gain. Instead, they expressed concern about what they had observed and desired clarity rather than notoriety. After submitting the photographs, they vanished from the narrative entirely. No follow-up interviews were released, nor was there any public inquiry into their identities. The Calvine case is frequently likened to the Petit Rachin photograph from Belgium during the 1989 to 1990 Belgian wave, another clear depiction of an unidentified object. Nonetheless, that photograph, despite its notoriety, was ultimately revealed to be a hoax. In contrast, Calvine has never faced debunking, and unlike Petit, it was seized by military intelligence within hours of its submission. That distinction continues to resonate with researchers. As of 2025, the original negatives remain secured under lock and key. Numerous FOIA requests from British journalists, citizen investigators, and academics have been either denied or met with delays. While the print shared by Craig Lindsay provides substantial visual documentation, experts argue that without the negatives, the image cannot undergo comprehensive forensic validation. Yet, for many, the photograph's message is self-evident. Its contents are far from dramatic. There is no ray of sunlight piercing through the clouds, no strange creature flitting across the sky, no throngs of astonished bystanders, just one metallic object, quietly hovering above the lush Scottish hills, flanked by military jets under the glaring daylight. Civilians witnessed this spectacle, and reporters chronicled it, only for it to recede into an unsettling silence afterward. The enigmatic object left no crash site behind, nor did it establish a radar trail, yet it never faded into folklore as so many others have. This photograph has been meticulously recorded. It has garnered serious contemplation, and yet it remains shrouded in secrecy. The Calvine image transcends being merely a visual curiosity. It offers a poignant lesson on how governments often manage encounters with the inexplicable. The British Ministry of Defense never deemed this object a danger. However, it also never divulged its assessment of the incident to the public. Instead, it opted to gather the data and file it away for safekeeping. In the void of authoritative clarification, the narrative persists, lingering in the background. Traces endure, faded memories, documents, a single surviving photograph, while the sky over Calvine, much like the broader landscapes of rural Scotland, remains tranquil. Yet for those who recall that August day in 1990, one lingering question continues to loom above the hills. Why did they want to keep it hidden from us? Consider the Emelson abduction that transpired on May 10, 1978. Emelin, nestled within the Lublin voivodeship of Poland, was a village much like countless others dotting the eastern farmlands, serene, secluded, and largely untouched by modern advances. In this quiet place, the majority of families engaged in agriculture or tended to livestock. By the spring of 1978, Jan Wolski had reached the age of 71. Having spent his entire life in Emelson, Wolski was a man of modest means, known for his calm demeanor, tireless work ethic, and steadfast connection to the land. Not one to indulge in science fiction, he did not possess a radio, and when he spoke, folks listened not out of reverence, but because of the rarity of his words. On that morning of May 10th, the dawn broke cool and pale. As was customary, Wolski arose early and began feeding the horses. His intention was to cart a small batch of potatoes to a nearby hamlet. After harnessing his mare to the wooden wagon, he navigated along a rough, narrow forest path skirting the trees. That is when he first noticed them. Two figures strolled along the edge of the trail. Initially, Wolski assumed they were perhaps young men from a neighboring village, possibly out foraging for mushrooms, an activity not unusual during spring. However, as his cart drew nearer, he slowed his approach. There was something peculiar about their movements, too smooth, too fluid. Their dark, form-fitting overalls were crafted from a material beyond Wolski's understanding. Their skin possessed a pale, almost olive-gray hue. Their facial features were small and narrow, with almond-shaped eyes positioned unusually wide apart. They bore no hair, no eyebrows, nor ears. The two spoke in a language entirely foreign to him, rapid, clipped syllables that bore no resemblance to Polish, Ukrainian, or anything he had ever encountered. Yet, panic didn't seize him. He later recounted that he simply observed. This was his instinctive reaction, honed through years of working with animals and traversing the woods. The silent duo gestured for him to accompany them. There was no menace, no compulsion, just an inexplicable aura of expectancy. He descended from his cart, following them roughly 30 meters into the woods. There, in a clearing familiar to him since childhood, loomed a large object, suspended about 5 feet above the ground. It didn't rest on legs nor wheels. It hovered. The peculiar structure resembled a small barn, its edges rounded. Its surface glimmered with a dull white or silvery sheen, appearing entirely seamless, devoid of rivets or seams. A ramp extended from its lower part, and without hesitation, the figures climbed aboard. Wolski followed suit. Inside, an overwhelming quiet enveloped him. No mechanical hum or vibration, just a profound silence interlaced with a faint aroma. He likened it to the scent of ozone or freshly sliced mushrooms. The interior seemed illuminated, yet no apparent source of light was visible. Illumination simply existed. Within, 4 additional beings, all attired similarly, conversed in the same strange dialect. They beckoned for Wolski to remove his clothing. Once more, he stated later that he experienced no fear. Instead, confusion enveloped him, coupled with an unmistakable sense of being monitored, scrutinized, yet not endangered. Stripping down to his underwear, he stood upon a platform while one being brandished a small device, not larger than a deck of cards, which emitted no sound. He felt no touch. This examination was over in mere minutes. Another figure opened a compact cabinet and produced what appeared to be a biscuit. Wolski declined the offer. After an estimated 15 minutes passed, the same two beings who had escorted him into the craft gestured for him to exit. He redressed and descended the ramp, observing the object maintain its silent hover as he returned to his horse and cart. A moment later, from a distance of approximately 30 meters, Wolski turned to look back. The craft ascended without a trace of dust or sound, rising straight up through the trees before vanishing into the heavens. The two figures had disappeared. By mid-morning, Wolski arrived home and immediately recounted the encounter to his family. His sons, skeptical but intrigued, accompanied him back to the clearing. What they discovered was simple yet irrefutable. 4 square imprints in the soil, evenly spaced, each about the size of a shoebox. The surrounding grass appeared slightly flattened, not scorched or broken, but compressed as if under some weight. The trees encircling the site remained unscathed. News spread swiftly, and within a day, neighbors and villagers began to flock to the location. Children frolicked near the impressions, mothers whispered amongst themselves, and men smoked pensively, casting furtive glances upward. 2 days later, a contingent of researchers arrived from Warsaw. Included in this group was psychologist and UFO investigator Zbigniew Bolnar, who conducted interviews and filmed Wolski recounting his extraordinary experience. The footage has endured to this day. In it, Wolski appears composed, lucid, and forthright. He narrates his account without hesitation, devoid of embellishment. He describes the object as plainly as a man might recount a cart or barn. The beings exhibited no aggression. The experience, while bizarre, did not instill terror in him. When queried about why he thought this incident occurred, he simply shrugged. They desired to observe, he stated, to investigate. Bolnar and his team undertook soil examinations at the location. No traces of radioactivity were detected, and there was no significant magnetism observed. Only slightly compacted marks were found, aligning with Wolski's description of the object's supports or legs. As time progressed, additional witnesses began to emerge. A young boy recounted seeing a brilliant light descending into the woods that morning. A local beekeeper mentioned that his hives had exhibited an unusual stillness on May 10th. A young woman asserted she heard a strange humming sound, akin to the wind passing through metal, at dawn. Notably, none of these witnesses had conversed with Wolski prior to sharing their experiences. No formal investigation ensued, at least none that was made public. However, according to subsequent reports, Poland's Ministry of Internal Affairs, MSW, discreetly gathered sightings from rural regions throughout the 70s and 80s, particularly those involving visual crafts or ground impressions. Internal memos from that period, later acquired by Polish researchers, indicate that Wolski's case was noted but never pursued. Years flowed by, and Wolski continued his life as a farmer, caring for his horses and attending Sunday Mass. He never altered his account, nor did he seek the limelight. When another researcher inquired in the 1980s whether he maintained his claims, he merely nodded. There was nothing to be gained, he articulated, questioning why he would fabricate such a story. In 2005, a monument was erected at the periphery of the Hamilton Forest, featuring a tall stone column adorned with a stylized illustration of the craft and an inscription proclaiming that on the 10th of May 1978 in Milchin, a UFO object landed. The truth will astonish us in the future. To this day, the narrative remains one of Poland's most thoroughly recorded and scrutinized UFO incidents. Bolnar's findings received publication in national journals. The Polish authorities never issued a formal declaration. For scholars intrigued by high strangeness, a Milchin stands out as a singular case. It presents an individual witness of substantial credibility, immediate physical evidence, psychological assessment, and local corroboration, all nestled within the backdrop of a Cold War Eastern Bloc, far removed from Western media scrutiny. For the village itself, the tale never morphed into a spectacle. It remained just what it had always been, a peculiar morning quietly recounted and quietly cherished. Why Jan Wolski was selected or what precisely the beings were seeking remains a mystery. Yet, Emulsion remembers, even if the world chooses to forget. The Essex Field Entity, 1979, Essex, England. What was anticipated to be an ordinary summer weekend in Essex took an unexpected turn. On the evening of August 17, 1979, three teenagers from Colchester, Stephen Marsh, aged 15, his cousin Daniel Marsh, 16, and their friend Aliyah Forum, also 15, set off on a hiking excursion. Their destination lay within a stretch of rural farmland near the village of Toish Hunt Major. This area was popular among local campers, nestled amid abandoned pillboxes and hedges that had stood unchanged since the Second World War. The trio intended to camp overnight in the fields just beyond an old irrigation ditch, a location recommended by Stephen's older brother for its seclusion and superb view of the night sky. Aliyah brought along a small camera, Daniel carried a portable radio, and Stephen, ever the aspiring scout, packed a flashlight, 2 compasses, and a well-worn copy of the Observer's Book of Astronomy. They pitched their modest tent around 7:30 in the evening, prepared sausages over a compact gas stove, and settled in for what they anticipated would be an uneventful night. However, around 9:40 in the evening, just as twilight yielded to darkness, Aliyah pointed towards a glow at the field's edge, prompting the trio to turn their attention to a soft amber light shimmering gently just above the barley, approximately 200 meters away. Initially, the glow appeared stationary. Then it began to pulse softly yet rhythmically. Daniel suggested it might be the headlight of a car or a lantern, but the illumination exhibited unnatural movement, hovering and shifting laterally, not swaying as light typically does through trees or reflecting from a moving vehicle. There was no road in that direction, only stretches of open field. They gathered their gear and proceeded toward it, treading quietly along the dirt path lining the crops. The night was devoid of wind. The only sounds were the chirps of insects and the occasional distant bark of a dog. As they advanced to within 30 meters of the glow, Stephen raised his flashlight to briefly illuminate the source of the light. What they witnessed froze them in their tracks. Standing in the field was a humanoid figure, roughly 6 feet tall, clad in a dark, seemingly metallic suit. Its head was covered by a sleek, domed helmet that reflected the faint luminescence. In its right hand, the figure wielded a slender rod or wand, emitting a series of sharp, pulsing beeps. The light they observed appeared to emanate from a small device affixed to the figure's chest or shoulder. The entity moved slowly and methodically through the barley, crouching and collecting samples. They could see it using the rod to inspect the plants before selecting stalks and depositing them into a container slung over its shoulder. For several minutes, the teenagers remained concealed behind a low hedge, watching intently, as Stephen whispered that it was not human. "Not really?" Aliyah questioned, her eyes wide with curiosity. Daniel raised the radio to his ear, attempting to shift frequencies. As he did, static drowned out every channel. There was no music, no dialogue, only a low hum followed by silence. The figure paid no heed to their presence, seeming completely absorbed in its task. Suddenly, the light on its chest began to pulse more rapidly. Standing upright, it advanced toward the field's center. In that moment, a brilliant flash enveloped the entire area, accompanied by a vibration beneath their feet. The light pulsed one last time, and the figure vanished. There was no sound, no further movement, just the field and night resuming their previous state. The teenagers fled. They reached the village within the hour and reported the incident to the local police station. Constable Malcolm Rudd gathered the teenagers' accounts, with each one recounting the same enigmatic figure, identical actions, and the same peculiar equipment. Shortly after midnight, he accompanied them back to the field they had described. What met his gaze brought him to a halt at the location the teens pointed out, a flattened circular expanse within the barley, approximately 10 feet in diameter. The crop lay in a meticulously spiral formation, untouched and consistent, while at the center rested 3 smaller square patches where plants had been removed with striking cleanliness, leaving no indication of trampling or uprooted roots. There were no footprints in the vicinity. Rudd documented the scene with Polaroid photographs and proceeded to fill out an incident report, designating the occurrence as unexplained rural activity. From that point onward, the case languished without formal investigation. Aaliyah had managed to capture a solitary photograph just prior to the bright flash. It depicted a shadowy silhouette, partially obscured by glare, poised among the barley stalks. Although this image was deemed inconclusive, she preserved it alongside her meticulous sketches and notes. In the days that followed, Daniel observed that his radio functioned erratically, with the antenna inexplicably burned out. Meanwhile, Stephen's compass revealed peculiar signs of magnetic interference, its needle swaying aimlessly even when held steady. By September, the story garnered local media attention. The Essex Gazette published a brief article entitled, "Teenagers Claim to See Alien in Field," soon followed by a playful segment on Anglia TV, characterized by an air of mockery. Yet, it was this very attention that caught the interest of Ruth Elms, a postgraduate researcher hailing from the University of Kent. Ruth, dedicated to collating close encounter reports from across Britain, initiated contact with the three witnesses. She interviewed each individually, analyzing their narratives and acquiring copies of their personal writings for comparison. In her paper from 1982, titled "Silent Harvest: Anomaly in Essex," Ruth documented several parallels linking the Essex incident to other biological sampling accounts reported in France and rural Illinois throughout the same decade. In those instances, witnesses recounted encounters with humanoid beings that extracted vegetation using sophisticated tools, often occurring under the veil of night and accompanied by noticeable electromagnetic disruptions. Reports suggested that the Ministry of Defense had become aware of Ruth's paper, although she received no formal feedback. Later that same year, a duo of researchers affiliated with the British UFO Research Association visited the site. By that time, the field had been harvested. However, soil samples taken from the area where the circular formation had once been displayed, traces of thermal exposure and subtle radiation levels that exceeded normal background readings. The findings were ultimately categorized as inconclusive. Throughout the 80s and 90s, the Essex case emerged as a recurring theme in fringe literature. It made appearances in various books and was discussed in late-night radio programs, yet it remained unproven and insufficiently accounted for. Stephen embarked on a career as a civil engineer. Daniel sought new horizons abroad, while Aaliyah pursued a path in art and education. During a conference held in Swindon in 2004, Ruth Elms offered an updated hypothesis, suggesting that occurrences reminiscent of the Essex experience indicated systematic and non-hostile collection efforts by unknown entities. The beings involved appeared indifferent to human presence, focusing solely on the botanical matter. Ruth articulated the insight that it's not us they are studying, it's what we cultivate. In 2006, a Freedom of Information request uncovered a heavily redacted briefing note from the Ministry of Defense referencing the incident from 1979 in Essex. This file, identified as AGR 101, related to rural biogenic activity and featured grainy images of the spiral formation, describing the report as credible yet unsubstantiated. Aaliyah, during a 2010 interview with Foreign Times, expressed her conviction by stating that she never needed anyone to believe her, because she was certain of what she witnessed and understood that they were not meant to see it. Her sentiments resonated on a deeper level, silently recognizing that not every form of contact involves lights illuminating the sky or vessels hovering above. More often, it revolves around what thrives beneath our feet. To this day, a rational explanation remains elusive. The entity within the Essex field stays an unresolved enigma, a transient visitation, a specimen harvested, a luminescent glow consumed by the shadow. What compels the gathering of plant life under the cover of night? The Mar Plata military pursuit of 1965 comes to mind. That fateful October began with a radar alert that disrupted the tranquility of a serene evening. At 22:16 hours on October 2, 1965, Subofficial Primero Luis Romero found himself alone inside the dimly illuminated radar control room at Argentina's Mar del Plata Naval Air Base. The room resonated with the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic sweep of rotating radar arms while he logged minor aerial activities along the coast. Out of nowhere, a sharp, unnatural ping illuminated the center of his monitor, an anomaly that was more than just a simple blip. It represented something rapid, too rapid, traversing the coastline at a speed exceeding 5,000 kilometers per hour. He leaned in closer, adjusting the scope, only to freeze at the sight before him. The object he observed defied conventional flight patterns. It did not follow an arc or a curve, but rather sliced through the sky in a straight line, stopping abruptly mid-sweep. There was no deceleration, no inertia, just an instantaneous halt. Then, in the blink of an eye, the object darted laterally across a stretch of 30 kilometers. Romero tapped the console, questioning whether a glitch had occurred, but the signal remained steady. The reading was genuine. He double-checked the radar sweep timing, grappling with the incomprehensibility of the situation. After years of monitoring military flights and weather balloons, Romero knew this behavior was beyond any recognized aviation pattern. He reached for the red receiver and reported the incident. Within 7 minutes, the base's sirens blared. Boots echoed against concrete as two IAE-33 Polk E-2 jet fighters were hastily dispatched under heightened alert. Their mission was to intercept an unidentified, non-transponding entity executing impossible maneuvers within sovereign airspace. The term UFO was never uttered, not out loud. Each individual who had studied the radar data comprehended that this was no civilian aircraft. It lacked the characteristics of any conventional aircraft entirely. It was something else altogether. Its two designated pilots that fateful night, Capitan Nesto Oliva and Teniente Eduardo Roachcha, ranked among the most reliable aviators on base. As they sped down the runway, they remained unaware of the elusive target they were about to pursue, instilled only with the knowledge that the command had originated from the highest authority and that the unidentified object had vanished from the radar. The orders they received were perplexing. The instructions stated to intercept and observe exclusively. Engagement was out of the question. This implied that someone in a position of power was already skeptical of classifying the object as an enemy aircraft. Alternatively, perhaps they were fully aware of its true nature and recognized that engagement would yield no results. By the time the jets ascended to 10,000 feet and veered northeast over the South Atlantic, the object had moved once more, gliding effortlessly to 20,000 feet before pausing again. The glowing sphere emerged against the inky darkness of the night. It hovered too steadily to be a flare, too luminously bright for any weather balloon, and certainly too rapid for any aircraft under the possession of Argentina or its neighboring countries. Roachcha confirmed visual contact. Both jets recalibrated their course toward the anomaly, picking up speed. The sphere appeared to hold its position, as if it were scrutinizing them. Then, it transitioned not with the force of acceleration, but with instantaneous velocity. From a complete standstill, it shot eastward across the ocean. The pursuit proved brief. Even unleashing their full power, the Polk E-2s couldn't match its pace. In mere seconds, the object soared to 40,000 feet and vanished as if the jets were immobilized. The cockpit radios buzzed with activity as Oliva and Roachcha relayed their reports. Visuals lost, no radar acquisition, target climbing rapidly. And then, silence. Back at Mar del Plata, the radar screen displayed nothing. The object had seemingly evaporated, either soaring too high, retreating too far, or simply gone. The jets returned under a blanket of radio silence. Darkness enveloped the hangar upon their arrival, illuminated only by the presence of an unmarked admin truck stationed just off the runway, awaiting them. Immediately upon landing, both pilots were segregated and escorted to debriefing rooms. Their flight data was confiscated. Ground crews were barred from entering the hangars. Observers noted unmarked personnel clad in civilian attire consulting with the base commander. The records for October 2nd were classified. The chase, which lasted no more than 12 minutes, never found official documentation. Later that very night, Romero found himself at his post, only to discover that the radar tapes from his shift had already been discarded. Rumblings of the incident traversed the base swiftly, not through formal reports but through a significant silence that blanketed everyone. Awareness of something extraordinary loomed over them, yet no one dared to inquire further. The phenomenon was subsequently dubbed Luke Nodokabadi, the light that never grazed the earth. Thus commenced the cover-up. Lieutenant Julio Fernandez, at that time a junior officer in administrative intelligence, meticulously documented events in his handwritten journal during his tenure at the base. In a 2018 interview, long after his retirement, he disclosed how, merely 3 days post-incident, a memo circulated mandating that all documents pertaining to the October 2nd interception be recorded under non-standard training activities. This memo, bearing the stamp of naval intelligence, held a classification typically reserved for foreign surveillance or experimental weapon testing. Its heading read, Non-Standard Aerial Encounter, Coastal Zone Tango 14. No further discourse was permitted on the matter. For nearly 40 years, the Mardla incident lay buried beneath an elaborate shroud of silence. This buried history shifted dramatically in 2003 when investigative journalist Mariana Rivas, probing Cold War-era radar anomalies, submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the Argentine Ministry of Defense. Initially, her first request faced denial, yet her subsequent appeal, leveraging new transparency laws, produced a heavily redacted document entitled Operation Phantasma. While lacking substantial detail, it provided enough insight. The file affirmed the deployment of 2 intercept aircraft on October 2, 1965, due to an unidentified aerial vehicle. It highlighted how the object exhibited non-ballistic trajectories and had exited the radar range at extraordinary velocities. The final evaluation concluded with the striking statement, "No conventional aircraft or atmospheric condition can account for the target's behavior." Rivas diligently tracked down Teniente Rocha, who, at 64 and residing in Mendoza, recounted his experience for the first time in public. They pursued something that effortlessly outpaced their best jets, as if operating beyond the constraints of reality. It had no wings, no discernible heat trail, and it moved with apparent disregard for the laws of physics. It could not be a balloon. It could not be a missile. It was something else entirely. Rocha's account contributed new dimensions to the narrative. During the pursuit, he experienced unsettling static bursts through his headset, sharp, high-frequency tones that bore no resemblance to any known radio signatures. Oliva similarly encountered this phenomenon. Out of fear of being grounded, neither pilot reported the occurrences at the time. Instead, they were both instructed to classify the mission as null, a training sortie devoid of any operational purpose. However, it was hardly training. Rocha asserted it was surveillance, and they were the subjects under scrutiny. The tale gains gravitas not only from the testimonies themselves, but also from vital corroborations. Civilian air traffic logs from Buenos Aires noted an unidentified object traversing the South Atlantic at high altitudes during the same time frame. Commercial pilots operating in Patagonia reported receiving encrypted communication over the frequency utilized by military interceptors. Local fishermen near Miramar described witnessing a luminous star plummet toward the ocean and subsequently disappear. Then came the international revelation. In 1991, a technician from the Chilean Air Force radar claimed to have tracked the same object emanating from Punta Arenas. It traversed eastward at speeds exceeding 7,000 kilometers per hour. He quietly reported the observation to his commanding officer, but it bore no immediate consequence. Years later, however, he recounted the incident to an aviation historian, illustrating the object's movement as direct, silent, and purposeful. In 2012, a declassified memo from the Cold War era, originating from the U.S. Navy and unveiled through joint Argentine-Brazilian transparency measures, came to light. Dated November 1965, it alluded to a recent aerial phenomenon observed over Mar del Plata that could be of interest to North Atlantic defense analysis. This statement affirmed what many had suspected. The United States was also monitoring the skies. Thus, if it did not belong to their airspace or that of their allies, then what was it? Detractors propose explanations ranging from weather anomalies to misidentified balloons or satellites. However, seasoned fighter pilots do not scramble their aircraft for balloons. They maintain a visual on something traversing at 5 knots. Others suggest experimental aircraft, perhaps of Soviet or American origin. Yet in 1965, neither superpower had publicly showcased technology capable of lateral hypersonic maneuvers or sustained, silent hovering. Even in our modern era, such advancements linger in the realm of theoretical physics. What endure are fragmented accounts, classified missions, concealed documents, and the testimonies of veteran pilots whose sightings radically altered their perceptions of the heavens. Compelling radar data revealed an entity crossing the ocean like an elusive shadow driven by intent. Captain Oliva, who passed away in 2017, shared his reflections in his last recorded interview. When posed the question regarding his beliefs about the object, he took his time before responding. It was not a threat, not a human craft, and not of our making. His next words lingered in the air, emphasizing how they pursued the unknown while it dictated the chase. The military interrogation at Mar del Plata continues to be one of the Cold War's most meticulously recorded yet shrouded aerial encounters, representing a moment when the delicate boundary separating military oversight from the unknown was abruptly, silently trampled upon. Why conceal a pursuit monitored across multiple radars, substantiated by elite pilots and validated beyond national territories? The answer lies in the perilous truth that, if faced openly, would compel a drastic reshaping of our understanding, not merely of flight logs, but of our existence in a universe where we may not be alone. Consider the Livingston incident occurring on the 9th of November in 1979. The town of Livingston, Scotland, was draped in the frigid atmosphere of an early morning, with a ghostly fog lingering over Descant Law, a wooded rise adjacent to the industrial backdrop. The frost crunched beneath the feet of forestry worker Robert Bob Taylor as he parked his pickup truck at the boundary of a clearing. At 10:30 in the morning, his agenda for the day unfolded with normalcy, inspecting a handful of trees for signs of decay or damage from the elements, and then moving on. However, what transpired next in those woods would evolve into one of Britain's most perplexing and rigorously examined UFO cases, arguably the singular instance addressed by law enforcement as a potential assault. Bob, at the age of 61, epitomized practicality. Having served as a Royal Engineer during World War II, he dedicated years of his life to forestry work under the Livingston Development Corporation. Accompanied solely by his loyal red setter dog, Lara, he approached a path leading to a clearing enveloped by towering pines and firs. The atmosphere within the woods was oddly silent. An unnatural quiet pervaded, devoid of wind or birdsong. Upon cresting the rise, Bob's gaze fixed upon an object that defied comprehension. There, at the heart of the clearing, rested a large circular entity measuring approximately 20 feet in diameter and standing around 12 feet high. Its metallic sheen, a dark gray, rendered it nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding timber. The surface bore a rough texture, appearing weathered, while short protrusions resembling fins encircled its rim. The object hung just above the ground, devoid of sound. Initially, disbelief washed over Bob, soon replaced by an overwhelming sense of awe as he cautiously ventured closer. Yet, the encounter swiftly morphed from the bizarre into the terrifying. Without warning, two smaller spheres, each roughly 3 feet in diameter and resembling spiky sea mines, detached from the object's underside and rolled toward him with a disturbing rapidity. Before he could process the unfolding events, these metallic spheres converged upon him, releasing an acrid odor reminiscent of burning brakes. A high-pitched hissing noise filled the air as Bob felt an inexplicable pressure clamp onto the sides of his trousers, right around his thighs. The spiked spheres attempted to seize or drag him closer, inducing a sensation of paralysis accompanied by a nauseating pressure weighing heavily on his head. As darkness encroached on his vision, silence enveloped him. Upon regaining consciousness, he discerned a subtle shift in the sky. Time had elapsed, though the duration remained elusive. The clearing lay empty, the craft vanished. His faithful dog whimpered nearby. Confused and dazed, Bob found himself sprawled on the ground, his trousers torn at the hips, legs battered and muddied. His throat felt parched and his thoughts swirled in a fog of bewilderment. Somehow, he managed to stagger towards his pickup truck, only to discover it would not start. Disoriented, he made the mile-long trek back home on foot. His wife stood shocked at his arrival, his clothing in tatters, dirt smeared across him, and confusion etched into his wide eyes. He gasped out that something had attacked him. After she assisted him in tending to his wounds, she reached out to his employer. Shaken, Bob relayed his account, the object, the spheres, the overwhelming pressure, and the strange smell. It was a narrative that seemed incredulous, yet Bob Taylor was not a man given to fabrication. That same day, the police were summoned. What transpired next distinguished this case from the typical UFO sighting. Officers from the Livingston Police Department approached the report as one of possible assault rather than mere fantasy. When a uniformed unit assessed the site the following morning, they uncovered compelling evidence. On the ground lay 40 small circular impressions, indentations in the soil appearing to align with the description of the spiked spheres. Additionally, larger, lad-like tracks were spaced evenly apart, forming a cross pattern that suggested where the larger object may have landed or hovered. Despite the compact frost covering the ground, the marks were starkly clear, as though imprinted by immense weight. Officers meticulously documented the scene with photographs and measurements, securing the area while launching a formal investigation into the reported assault. Bob Taylor underwent a medical examination, revealing injuries to his legs consistent with the effects of being gripped or pinched by a mechanical device. The trousers taken into evidence bore tears that implied upward tugging rather than simple snagging on shrubbery. Forensics found no indications of chemical burns. However, the grazes on his thighs exhibited an oddly symmetrical pattern. Over the course of the subsequent week, police interrogated Bob multiple times, yet his account never wavered. He offered no claims about aliens, nor did he indulge in speculation. He merely articulated what he had witnessed: a craft, 2 spheres, an odd smell, a haze of unconsciousness, and then awakening in the same spot. He possessed no prior history of hallucinations, mental health crises, or substance misuse. Averse to seeking fame, he maintained a non-religious stance. What rendered this case even more extraordinary was the response from officials. The Lothian and Borders Police officially lodged an assault report, marking this incident as the only UFO case in the United Kingdom to have been formally treated as a criminal investigation. Superintendent Ian Warr later remarked that the investigation had concluded, deeming it unexplained and refraining from offering further commentary. He disclosed that no human involvement could be associated with the occurrence, nor had any equipment or vehicles corresponding to the object's description ever been located. The tale captured national attention, appearing in publications such as the Scotsman, Daily Record, and even garnering coverage from international media. A torrent of reporters descended upon Livingston, yet Bob chose not to exploit the sudden spotlight. He participated in a handful of interviews, consistently composed and meticulous in his explanations, displaying a sense of hesitation amid the growing intrigue. Skeptics, predictably, stepped into the fray. Some proposed that he had encountered ball lightning, despite meteorological records indicating that no storms had been reported on that fateful day. Others hypothesized that he may have suffered a mini-stroke or seizure, imagining that the event had unfolded purely in his mind. However, the physical remnants such as the damage to his attire, his body, and the site definitively contradicted any notion of a mere fainting spell, no burn marks from lightning, nor the elusive missing time typical of fugue states. And what of those perfectly symmetrical footprints? In 1980, the UK's Ministry of Defence expressed interest in this case. Although never subjected to an official inquiry by their UFO division, certain internal communications acknowledged that the array of evidence, especially the impressions left on the ground, warranted additional scrutiny. For years thereafter, civilian investigators and UFO enthusiasts flocked to the site, gathering soil samples. The vegetation within the indentations exhibited stunted growth when compared to the surrounding flora. Throughout his life, Bob Taylor remained unwavering in his account. Even in his later years, he continued to be a modest man, earning respect from colleagues and neighbors alike. He passed away in 2007, steadfast in his claim that the phenomena experienced in those woods had indeed transpired and that a concrete explanation remained elusive. The woodland surrounding Descant Law remains accessible even today, with a modest sign marking the locality of the encounter. Visitors traverse the path once taken by Bob that morning, engaging in their quests for answers while pondering the true nature of what transpired. The location has seamlessly woven itself into the fabric of Scotland's unofficial UFO narrative. The Livingston incident remains remarkable, not solely for the witness, a straightforward forestry worker devoid of any motive to deceive, but also due to the seriousness with which authorities approach the matter. Medical evidence, police documentation, soil samples, and shredded clothing all indicated not delusion or fantasy, but an encounter with something genuinely otherworldly. Was Bob Taylor the unfortunate target of a malfunctioning drone from somewhere beyond our atmosphere? Or did he inadvertently stumble upon a secret not intended for human observation, facing dire consequences as a result? The case lingers, open in spirit if not in documentation. For those who delve into it, the enigma persists, silent and unresolved, much like the mist that enveloped the woods on that November morning. November 2nd, 1971, in Delos, Kansas, USA. The sky above Delos, Kansas, that early November evening was eerily tranquil. The sun had disappeared beneath the horizon, casting a golden glow over the Johnson family farm. 16-year-old Ron Johnson found himself outside, attending to the family's sheep with his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, his gaze wandering over the darkening sky. It was then that he became aware of it. A luminous circular object hovered just above the ground, nestled near a line of trees within their property. The object radiated a bluish-white luminescence and was completely silent. For a brief moment, Ron stood transfixed, captivated by the sight. Then, as if aware of his attention, the object began to ascend. He observed as it smoothly rose into the air and vanished without a sound, leaving behind only the dying light and an indelible impression of something profoundly unexplainable. Rushing inside, Ron called out for his parents. His voice trembled with urgency as he urged them to come outside without delay. His parents, Darrell and Irma Johnson, followed him to the location where the glowing object had hovered. There, at the very spot, they discovered a perfect circle marked in the soil, faintly glowing, almost phosphorescent. This strange ring marked the beginning of one of the most scientifically absorbing UFO cases ever recorded in the United States. The Johnson family stood there, silhouetted against the backdrop of fading light, fixated on the bizarre formation. Approximately 8 feet in diameter, the ring protruded slightly, and the soil within it displayed a crusty white dryness unlike anything they had encountered before. The glow was subtle yet undeniable, evoking a sense of wonder that none of them had ever experienced. Tentative yet intrigued, they reached down to probe the soil. Ron's mother instantly noted a numbing sensation in her fingertips. Darrell Johnson later reported experiencing skin irritation that same evening. Following the incident, the family began to face a series of peculiar symptoms. They complained of burning eyes, tingling hands, and persistent headaches over the subsequent days. Ron even asserted that he felt dizzy and somewhat disoriented the following morning. As word of the encounter circulated through the small agricultural community, neighbors visited the next day to investigate the site. Many corroborated that the ring continued to exhibit its glow. The soil nestled within the circle had morphed into a fibrous, dry crust that starkly contrasted with the damp earth surrounding it. Remarkably, despite the recent rainfall, the area inside the ring remained inexplicably arid. By the second day, local officials had taken an interest. A sheriff's deputy arrived at the farm, collected testimonies from the family, and compiled an official report. Shortly thereafter, news of the Delos ring captured the attention of the UFO research community. Organizations such as the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization and the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena reached out to the Johnson family, seeking permission to study the site. Investigators appeared within a week, gathering soil samples, photographing the intriguing site, and documenting eyewitness accounts. The case piqued the interest of Ted Phillips, a prominent expert in physical trace evidence who had studied countless landing sites around the globe. What he and fellow researchers uncovered at Delos would puzzle scientists for years to come. The ring persisted in visibility for several months and astonishingly remained perceptible even more than 2 years following the initial occurrence. Soil samples extracted from the ring were dispatched to various laboratories for analysis. The results revealed anomalous concentrations of hydrophobic compounds, substances notorious for repelling water. Remarkably, even after intense rainfall, the earth encircled by the ring stayed dry. Some researchers speculated that this dryness might stem from an elevated presence of organic material or the result of extreme thermal exposure. However, no prevailing agricultural or meteorological phenomenon could explain the extraordinary properties of the ring. Even stranger was the physical response the soil seemed to elicit in humans. Several investigators who made contact with it later reported sensations of numbness and tingling in their hands. While no long-lasting effects were documented, the consistency of these transient symptoms among independent witnesses was striking. Among the most captivating dimensions of the Delos case was the sheer volume of photographic documentation. The Johnsons, alongside researchers, captured an array of photographs across several months that chronicled the evolving appearance of the ring. In certain images, the ring appears subtly luminous, while others display a notable contrast in soil texture and hue. These visual records, carefully preserved to this day, offer rare and compelling support for the physical evidence. Skeptics were quick to voice their theories. Some posited that the glowing phenomenon might have been the result of fungal growth or mold, a natural occurrence sometimes documented in rural locations. However, laboratory examination decisively ruled this out. No fungal spores could be detected in the samples. Others insinuated the possibility of a hoax. Yet, the Johnson family never pursued media recognition or financial gain, and their uniform accounts throughout interviews rendered any notions of deception highly improbable. The UFO sighting, corroborated by numerous family members, remained the focal point of fervent debate. Critics contended that stress or suggestion might have induced hallucinations, yet Ron Johnson's recounting of the craft remained unwavering from the very first evening. He described a silent, radiant object featuring a domed top, effortlessly hovering before ascending into the vast Kansas sky. When juxtaposed with other sightings across the Midwest during the autumn of 1971, intriguing patterns began to surface. Reports of circular crafts hovering soundlessly were also noted in Oklahoma and Nebraska around the same time. Although circumstantial, these accounts provided a broader context for the unfolding events in Delphos. In 1973, researchers disseminated their findings through various scientific and UFO journals. The case evolved into a prominent topic at conferences and documentary presentations, celebrated for its rare amalgamation of physical trace evidence, medical symptoms, and credible witness accounts. For decades, it stood among the few landings scrutinized by mainstream scientists. Years later, Ron Johnson offered interviews reflecting on his experiences, persisting in his assertion of its veracity, and sharing that the incident had fundamentally altered his worldview. He remarked that the encounter, though unsolicited, instilled in him a profound understanding of the complexities beyond mere visual perception. In contemporary discussions regarding UFO landings that involve tangible evidence, the Delphos ring remains a critical point of reference. The soil samples archived in laboratories continue to resist comprehensive explanation. Efforts to replicate the ring's unique characteristics through heat, chemical processes, or organic manipulation have repeatedly met with failure. The essence of the Delos case transcends the mere sighting or the peculiar soil. it encompasses the entire sequence of events. A silent, luminous object, witnessed by a young boy, a perfect glowing ring left behind, physical reactions experienced by multiple individuals, soil-defying natural behavior, and corroborated lab results, all unfolded on a modest Kansas farm devoid of any motive for deceit. The Johnson family has since relocated, yet the land where the ring once illuminated remains an unmarked and largely forgotten expanse. Nevertheless, in the eyes of UFO researchers and scientists in pursuit of substantial evidence, the account of the Delos ring persists as one of the most intriguing cases recorded, shrouded in mystery. No official explanation has been proffered, nor has any known phenomenon successfully replicated the remarkable legacy it left behind. The Cusack Close Encounter transpired on August 29, 1967, in Canal, France. The sun ascended lazily over the undulating green hills of Canal, casting a gentle golden hue over the fields on a tranquil late summer morning. It was one of those serene pastoral days where little anticipation lingered in the air. Sheep grazed without haste, and the whispering wind danced through the grasses. On this particular day, two young siblings, François and Anne-Marie Dale, found themselves engaged in their usual vocation, tending to their cattle. François, at 13, sat perched upon a rock, while his younger sister, Anne-Marie, at 9, nestled beside him. The routine was familiar. Their simple task was to keep the cows within their designated pastures, ensuring none strayed into the woods or toward the village road. The day unfolded uneventfully until an inexplicable shift in the air prompted both children to turn their heads. François squinted toward a small hill just across from where they lingered. There, near the edge of a stone wall, stood four diminutive black figures. Although they appeared humanoid, they were shorter than any adults the children recognized. Standing just above a meter in height, they donned tight-fitting dark suits that glimmered subtly in the morning light. Initially, François considered the possibility that these figures were children from a nearby village participating in a curious game. Yet something transpired that logic could not easily rationalize. The figures began to levitate. In stunned silence, François and Anne-Marie watched as all four beings ascended slowly into the air, effortlessly and smoothly, as though the very laws of gravity had no relevance to them. Hovering just above was a luminous metallic sphere, approximately 3 meters in diameter, utterly silent. The sphere emitted a whitish-blue glow, pulsing gently in a steady rhythm. The beings ascended with a haunting synchronization, effortlessly retreating into the underbelly of the craft, which then vanished into nothingness without a trace. No blinding light, no thunderous sound, no gust of wind, simply gone. The children screamed in alarm. Driven by panic, but also a profound urge to grasp the reality of the moment they had witnessed, François dashed toward the precise spot where the figures had just stood, with Anne-Marie close behind, tears beginning to well in her eyes. They scanned the surrounding area, striving to decipher the incomprehensible. There were no impressions in the earth, yet a circle of scorched grass clearly delineated the location where the object had levitated. Nearby, the cattle had retreated, huddling together, exhibiting evident signs of distress. Some even bellowed in agitation. The cattle's behavior alone was sufficient to assure François that their experience was not a mere figment of imagination. The two children sprinted the short distance to their home, which lay about a kilometer away, and breathlessly relayed the astonishing event to their father. Aware that his children were not given to fabrications and seeing their evident fear, he grasped the seriousness of the situation. Within the hour, the local gendarmerie was alerted. Officer Jean Bouer from the Salur station was first on the scene, approaching the matter with a gravity that underscored its strangeness. He meticulously observed the scorched grass, noted the agitated livestock, and listened intently as the children recounted their experience with steadfast consistency. A formal report was compiled that very day. The French gendarmerie swiftly escalated the case, enlisting local medical personnel and scientific consultants to investigate further. Both François and Anne-Marie underwent separate interviews and were subjected to psychological assessments. Doctors confirmed they were in good health and displayed no signs of delusion or unrelated trauma beyond the encountered spectacle. Their narratives remained firmly aligned during subsequent questioning, even weeks into the future. As the French government had been monitoring a cascade of unusual aerial reports throughout Europe during the 1960s, a team of experts from the GEP, the official UFO investigative body under the CNS, was dispatched in secrecy. The team collected samples of the scorched soil, conducted tests for magnetic fields, and recorded readings for radiation. The burned patch revealed signs consistent with a sudden exposure to extreme heat. However, there was no indication of any ordinary combustion. Electromagnetic readings yielded inconclusive yet unusual results. While the scientific crew remained neutral in their approach, Officer Bouer offered a personal note attesting to the children's honesty. In his words, "There is no question in my mind that something extraordinary occurred." These children speak the truth. They witnessed what they claim to have seen. Local newspapers soon picked up the story. While some articles derided the children's account, attributing it to vivid imaginations, others approached it with a cautious curiosity given the involvement of authorities. Radio hosts engaged in fervent discussions, pondering if the sighting was authentic, a prank, or perhaps some psychological aberration. Nonetheless, most townsfolk familiar with the De Ilde family rallied in support of the children, understanding that they were not known for fantasy and noting that their story had remained unchanged. Shortly thereafter, a surprising development emerged. Just a few days following the initial sighting, a farmer several kilometers away reported witnessing a radiant sphere descending into a wooded area behind his fields. Although he did not see any beings, his sheep had scattered in fright, and his dog refused to approach the vicinity for hours thereafter. Investigators incorporated this incident into their case file, recognizing its proximity and timing. An even more curious occurrence followed a week later, when a group of schoolchildren in a neighboring town claimed to have seen small dark figures suspended in midair. Their teacher dismissed the account as a case of imagination run wild. However, when the police interviewed the children, their drawings astonishingly matched the descriptions given by François and Anne-Marie. Once again, no adults had witnessed this event. By this point, the GEP team had assembled a comprehensive dossier filled with photographs, interviews, and empirical data. An internal memo, which was later leaked to a French UFO research group in the 1980s, stated that this case represents one of the most coherent and inexplicable instances in national records. Witnesses are reliable. There is no indication of deceit or mental instability. Yet, despite the mounting evidence, the official government stance remained one of neutrality, with no public conclusions being drawn. The case gradually faded from national view. Years unfolded. François transitioned into a role as a mechanic, while Anne-Marie became a teacher. From time to time, journalists and UFO researchers would track them down for interviews, and they would consistently recount the same story, unwavering in their truthfulness. "We did not desire this notoriety," François remarked during an interview in the 1990s, "yet it transpired, and we cannot deny what occurred. I witnessed them. They were real." Skeptics continued to propose alternative explanations. Could it have involved pranksters in costumes manipulating some type of weather balloon? Might the children have experienced a shared illusion? Yet none of these theories accounted for the scorched earth, the altered behavior of the cattle, or the corroborated accounts from unrelated schoolchildren just days after. Most critically, there existed no motive. The De Ilde family never sought fame or financial gain. One particularly captivating aspect that piqued the interest of researchers was the manner in which the beings levitated. They did not hover awkwardly, nor did they exhibit any visible means of propulsion. Their ascent appeared smooth, systematic, and synchronized, as though they were devoid of weight. This detail, reiterated by numerous witnesses along with other European encounters of the time, became a recurring theme in Cold War UFO literature. Moreover, this encounter distinguished itself due to its sheer simplicity. There was no abduction, no communication, and no lights flashing across the heavens, just an ordinary day, two children tending to chores, and an extraordinary moment that fundamentally altered their perception of reality. Over the years, the Dailda encounter has solidified its position as a cornerstone case in the annals of French UFO history. It is frequently cited in comparative analyses of childhood encounters and remains a featured case in official GEP documentation as one of the most credible sightings involving youthful witnesses. Some researchers posit that children possess a heightened receptivity to extraordinary phenomena, being less conditioned to dismiss the bizarre. Yet the most haunting aspect continues to resonate. This was rural France during the 1960s. These were farm children, cut off from the urban legends surrounding America's obsession with flying saucers. Nonetheless, their descriptions of small humanoids, metallic vessels, and silent levitation fit seamlessly into the narratives shared by thousands around the globe. Did they conjure these images from their imaginations? Or do these accounts suggest the existence of a phenomenon that transcends cultural boundaries? Regardless of the rationale, the Kusk case endures as an enigma. Then came the Tanna Island orbs from 2003 to 2013. Mount Yasur, located on Tanna Island in Vanuatu, begins reminiscent of a legend but unfolds with undeniable reality. On a sultry summer evening in 2007, a Danish traveler named Lars Jensen found himself on the rim of Mount Yasur, the active volcano that dominates Tanna Island's southeastern slope. Accompanied solely by a local guide named Jonah, a reserved individual from the nearby village of Sulphur Bay, Lars was focused on capturing footage with his handheld camcorder. The earth quaked gently beneath them as the smell of sulfur hung thick in the humid night air. Lars had aimed his camera at the volcano's frequent eruptions, eager to record explosions of lava when, quite unexpectedly, a silent sphere radiating a bluish-white light began to rise slowly from the crater. It hovered in mid-air for a brief moment before darting out of sight in a flash, a motion too rapid for the untrained eye. Startled, he turned to Jonah, who remarked simply, "Spirit," as if that one word provided all the explanation necessary. Sometime later, Lars would upload the footage to a lesser-known travel blog. The clip languished in digital neglect until it was rediscovered 5 years down the line, coinciding with a surge of researchers flocking to Tanna Island, not for the allure of tourism, but in pursuit of understanding. Mount Yasur has been in a near-constant state of eruption for centuries, earning the moniker the Lighthouse of the Pacific. However, beginning in the early 2000s, an unusual sequence of events drew heightened scrutiny. Witnesses began reporting luminous spheres, described as glowing orbs, appearing above or even within the volcano's crater. Some of these orbs entered the volcano's mouth, lingering within before emerging unscathed, seemingly unaffected by the molten turmoil. Initially dismissed as atmospheric anomalies or mere camera artifacts, these sightings proliferated over the years. Tourists hailing from France, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan recounted their experiences, while locals had long integrated them into the fabric of their lives, accepting them as manifestations of ancestral sky spirits revered for generations. Among these accounts, one noteworthy instance in 2003 involved a French couple, Marie and Philippe Dupont, who, witnessing a nighttime eruption, observed 2 luminous spheres materializing from the ash cloud, hovering silently above the island like watchful eyes. The orbs remained visible for nearly a minute before shooting upward and disappearing behind a curtain of stars. Their camera captured only a faint glimmer, yet the memory remained vivid for years to come. Marie later recounted that it felt alive. Amateur geologists, like Dr. Greg Hammond, took notice, leading him to make several trips to Tanna Island by 2009 to document geological data, though he soon became enthralled by the orbs. He pondered how there could be no logical explanation for a sphere of light entering an erupting volcano and emerging unscathed in an interview. If this phenomenon is some type of natural plasma or ball lightning, it is unlike anything we have observed before. However, locals had no need for scientific validation. In Sulphur Bay and nearby villages, the orbs had long been woven into the rhythm of daily life. Elders cautioned children not to stray after them into the jungle. They shared tales of awe, ethereal beings of light who traversed the depths of Mount Yasur. One chief claimed the orbs safeguarded their ancestors from colonial assault. Other villagers insisted that the lights had manifested since time immemorial, with some suggesting that the orbs emerged only during specific lunar phases or the presence of visitors from distant lands. Whispers also circulated, recounting that foreign soldiers during World War II had witnessed them too, although those stories were reportedly hushed. Strikingly, many of the most credible sightings originated from guides, individuals who regularly escorted tourists to the crater and had encountered the orbs numerous times, yet still marveled at each appearance. In 2011, a group of German researchers equipped with advanced video technology, sensors, and thermal imaging devices arrived to investigate. Over 3 weeks, they documented several eruptions, but failed to capture an orb. On their final night, a guide named Kipe urged them to extend their stay for 1 more hour. That night, 2 spheres of pale green light manifested within the crater, their footage now archived in an academic journal in Berlin, depicting the orbs hovering just above the molten lava for nearly 45 seconds before fading without a trace. Significantly, the thermal readings recorded no unusual heat emitted by the orbs. This peculiar pattern of brilliant light devoid of heat left the scientific community scratching their heads, as plasma typically radiates intense heat. Yet, whatever these entities were, they appeared impervious to the natural laws of incandescence. In 2012, a Japanese film crew from NHK set out to create a documentary focused on volcano tourism. During interviews with local villagers, they inadvertently captured one of the most compelling pieces of evidence to date. A ball of light, approximately the size of a basketball, floated silently past the crater's edge in broad daylight. The video documented birds scattering, a dog barking, and an eerie stillness. The orb hesitated momentarily over the volcano's mouth, trembled slightly, and then ascended vertically into the clouds. While skeptics continued to propose theories concerning ball lightning, camera glitches, or misidentified drones, such explanations began to lose traction with each new report. No drone can withstand the 1,000-degree gases found within an active volcano. No atmospheric phenomenon lingers with an apparent awareness, responding to its surroundings or to individuals. Locals in the region remained largely unconcerned about external speculations, comfortable in their understanding that these orbs were not mere curiosities, but integral facets of their cultural heritage. For them, the orbs possessed a vitality of their own. They stood as watchers, perhaps even as messengers. Some of the village elders maintained that these luminous spheres originated from within the earth rather than from the celestial realm. One local storyteller elaborately described the volcano as a womb of the world, with the orbs representing its breath. This perspective piqued the interest of anthropologists, who became increasingly curious. The rich oral traditions surrounding these phenomena extended back generations, predating the advent of electricity, airplanes, and even modern conveniences. What had these individuals been perceiving all this time? Had the lights existed as steadfast companions to the fiery mountain, overlooked simply because there was no incentive to examine them with a deeper gaze? In spite of ongoing attempts to investigate, the orbs proved to be exceedingly elusive. They appeared without prior warning, often during moments when no one was prepared to capture evidence. Nonetheless, they never entirely ceased to manifest. On average, a credible sighting transpired every 4 to 6 months from 2003 to 2013. Intriguingly, some villagers began to share accounts of dreams preceding these sightings, visions of ethereal light, haunting melodies, or ancestral whispers emanating from the jungle. One respected midwife recounted how the orbs had seemingly visited her during childbirth ceremonies, a guardian presence witnessing the emergence of new lives. While these assertions could not be corroborated with concrete evidence, the recurring dreams among disparate villagers caught the attention of cultural researchers, stirring quiet intrigue. By 2013, the frequency of sightings began to dwindle. Some attributed this to climate changes, while others speculated that the volcano had entered a spiritually quieter phase. Yet, even after the documented events dwindled, the underlying belief remained firmly established. The final noteworthy sighting, reported in October 2013, came from a Dutch volcanologist named Peter van der Mee. He was meticulously recording gas emissions on the southern slope when an orange sphere descended swiftly down the mountainside, flying directly over his equipment and disappearing into the thick jungle canopy. His instruments detected a magnetic pulse, though no supplementary data could be obtained. In a succinct note published in a scientific bulletin, he concluded that they were engaged with a phenomenon unlike any known, whether it be a natural occurrence yet to be categorized or something inexplicably stranger. Mount Yasur continues to erupt today, unruly and unrestrained. Tourists flock to its rugged terrains, while local guides remain keen, ever watchful of the skies. And though a definitive explanation remains elusive, the sightings linger vividly within the collective consciousness of all those who have experienced them. Perhaps they are anomalies born of the Earth itself. Perhaps they serve as sentient observers. Alternatively, like the volcano, they may have coexisted alongside humanity for eons, older than any scientific classification, older than any tale, existing to silently watch from the breath of the Earth itself. The Kira Incident. August 25, 1972. Kira, Kochi Prefecture, Japan. Under the midday sun, the rice paddies of Kira, a quaint village in Japan's Kochi Prefecture, shimmered brilliantly. On August 25, 1972, at the height of summer break, the air vibrated with the sound of cicadas, while children roamed freely along the narrow dirt paths and canals, weaving through the lush fields. Among them were a group of adventurous schoolboys who were about to unwittingly stumble into a mystery that would boggle logic and perplex the very adults tasked with their guidance. 13-year-old Mio Matsuoka, accompanied by his brother and their close friends, wandered near the edge of a rice field when something flickered in his periphery. Hovering just above the ground, roughly 15 meters ahead, was a peculiar metallic object. It was diminutive, barely the size of a large hat, yet perfectly formed, resembling a flattened dome with a subtle lip encircling its base. It glistened in the sunlight, rotating silently in its place. The boys stood frozen, their carefree summer antics forgotten. One of them let out a stifled yelp, while another instinctively grabbed a nearby stone and hurled it. The object bobbed momentarily, then surged skyward with an astonishing speed, disappearing over the treetops. Stunned, yet exhilarated, the boys sprinted back to the village, breathlessly relaying their encounter to anyone willing to listen about the strange flying saucer they had witnessed. As anticipated, their claims were met with laughter and skepticism. Even their parents dismissed the story, attributing it to the vivid imaginations of children. But Mio refused to let the event slip away into obscurity. Over the ensuing days, he revisited the site armed with a borrowed camera, driven to capture tangible proof. On August 28th, he was finally presented with another opportunity. The object re-emerged, hovering once more in the same vicinity as before. This time, Mio was prepared. He clicked multiple photographs as the object spun and darted across the field. According to his later account, it hovered just a meter above the ground before zigzagging away and vanishing once more. The images he managed to capture were surprisingly clear. They depicted a disc-shaped object with what appeared to be a slightly raised dome in the center. The light bouncing off its surface rendered it an almost silvery hue. While the images bore the usual graininess expected from a low-quality film camera, they were compelling enough to garner immediate attention from local media and eventually national sources. When teachers at Mio's school examined the photos, they maintained their skepticism, but acknowledged that the boys' narrative was unusually coherent. In no time, the village was abuzz with tales of the mini UFO. Journalists flocked to Kira to interview the children, and the story evolved into a minor media sensation in Japan, appearing in local newspapers and on late-night radio shows. The allure extended beyond the photographs. It thrived on the fact that multiple young witnesses independently validated the event. At least 8 different students asserted that they had observed the object on numerous occasions. The majority described it as silver, rotating, and capable of sudden movements. A handful insisted it emitted a low humming sound. One boy even claimed to have attempted to capture it using a fishing net, only for it to dart away before he could act. Their testimonies remained strikingly consistent, even when questioned individually. Skeptics proposed that the object could merely be a toy, perhaps a sophisticated remote-controlled drone or an artfully thrown frisbee. However, in 1972, rural Japan had yet to see drone technology develop at a civilian level. No local manufacturer or enthusiast could elucidate how a mechanical object could maneuver in the astonishing way the boys described. The school's science instructor attempted to recreate the extraordinary visuals using model airplanes and reflective discs, yet he was unable to duplicate the elusive motion blur or the intricate details of the object observed. Meanwhile, the villagers, who had previously dismissed the initial claims, started to observe the skies with heightened scrutiny. A handful of elderly residents reported having seen silver flashes above the fields, though none managed to capture any images to corroborate their experiences. Then, on the 1st of September, Moyo's younger sibling asserted that he had actually managed to grasp the mysterious object in his hands for a fleeting moment. According to his account, he ventured alone back to the field upon hearing the now familiar humming sound. It was there that he claimed the object descended and settled into the grass. Measuring about 20 centimeters in diameter, it radiated warmth when touched. Its surface was unblemished and metallic, devoid of any apparent seams or screws. Just as he was about to inspect it further, it began to vibrate, eluding his grasp as it shot back into the sky. He returned home, bearing minor burns on his hands. While not severe, they were sufficient to prompt local educators to take his assertion more seriously. Following this incident, the rice field displayed signs of distress. In several areas where the boys had reported sightings, the rice plants became inexplicably stunted or turned yellow. The regional agricultural cooperative was summoned to analyze the field. Although they refrained from discussing anything related to unidentified flying objects, one official discreetly confessed to the press that the soil in those affected patches seemed unusually compact and dry, as if subjected to a potent heat source. With growing media attention and increasing public curiosity, a local newspaper released the photographs alongside a series of interviews. The captivating story drew the interest of UFO researchers in Tokyo, including members of the Japan Space Phenomena Society. They came to Kira to interview the children and assess the photographic negatives. Their findings indicated that the negatives exhibited no signs of alteration, double exposure, or layering. They concluded that the photographs were likely genuine and showed no evidence of manipulation. Nevertheless, no formal investigation was initiated by the government. Japan's defense agency decided to remain tight-lipped, and mainstream science quietly brushed the incident aside as nothing more than a childhood fantasy spiraling out of control. Yet, for many residents, the bizarre encounters persisted. In the subsequent weeks, villagers began reporting peculiar aerial lights during the twilight hours. A number of them claimed to have witnessed white and blue flashes darting across the evening sky. Others noted their radios ceased functioning when the lights appeared. School teachers, who had once been skeptics, started maintaining journals to document any unusual behaviors or sounds near the fields. On the 12th of September, one instructor recorded that he observed a strange flicker above the northern field, shortly followed by the abrupt muted chirping of cicadas. For Mio and his companions, the events left an indelible mark. They became increasingly withdrawn at school, especially as news crews relentlessly pursued them for interviews. Moyo later regretted taking the photographs, not out of fear of ridicule, but because the occurrence made him feel as though he was being watched long after the sightings ceased. Over time, the case faded from the national consciousness, yet it never fully vanished in Kira. Decades later, UFO researchers still reference the photographs as some of the most compelling evidence of a daylight encounter in contemporary Japanese history. The original prints and negatives were safeguarded by a small UFO archive in Osaka and were even exhibited at a private showcase in 2007. Several of the witnesses, now adults, participated in interviews, firmly adhering to their original accounts, unaltered, unembellished, and resolute, The Kira incident persists as one of Japan's most perplexing UFO encounters, not due to dramatic abductions or government cover-ups, but because of its straightforwardness. A group of innocent rural children witnessed something they could not comprehend. They captured it on film, articulated their experiences, and maintained their stance amidst the adult world's incredulity. To this day, some researchers ponder the nature of the object. Was it a probe, a scout, a malfunctioning drone from another realm? Or, as some folklorists propose, could it be the modern incarnation of a kami, a spiritual essence from Japan's rich traditions manifesting in a technological guise through the eyes of children? Regardless of the truth, the enigmatic object over the rice fields of Kira arrived and departed, leaving no definitive answers in its wake, but rather a plethora of inquiries and photographs. The Yambo encounter, dating to March 1993 in Yumbo Vala, Colombia, initiated with a flicker. Precisely at 2:17 in the morning, the lights within the Yumbo Power Substation's control room faltered and dimmed briefly. However, for the engineers present that night, trained to detect even the slightest discrepancies within a national grid, this momentary anomaly was enough to silence conversation. Situated near the industrial town of Yumbo, the substation was crucial for the southwestern region of Colombia, providing electricity to Cali and its surrounding communities. Engineer Jaime Enrique Menaces, a senior technician with 18 years of experience at the facility, was monitoring the overnight feed when a surge alert ignited. A red indicator illuminated, triggering a cascade of alarms. Something was rapidly draining power. The night crew, comprising 3 engineers and 2 security staff, sprang into action. Initially suspecting a high-voltage equipment malfunction or a grid overload, Menaces and his colleague Ricardo Fona advanced towards the high-voltage switchyard, soon revealing the actual source visible against the night sky. Hovering approximately 100 meters above the northwestern sector of the compound was a metallic disk. It was a sight beyond comprehension. Bathed in a peculiar orange glow, measuring about 10 meters in diameter, the object hovered in silence, its presence far from discreet. As the 2 engineers drew closer to the perimeter fence, the instruments they relied on began to falter. The surveillance cameras positioned around the substation went dark. Communication via radio abruptly ceased. Then, without any forewarning, a pulse erupted. An overwhelming wave of light, encompassing shades of blue and white, radiated outward from the mysterious object, slamming into the substation with the force of a shockwave. All 5 men instinctively ducked for cover. Sparks erupted from several transformers, and the consoles in the control room illuminated with a sequence of failures. A profound darkness enveloped the entire substation. Mans later described the phenomenon as akin to a silent explosion, one that left no auditory trace but conveyed its impact through sheer force. A wave of panic swept through the facility as the engineers hastened to initiate emergency protocols. Security personnel quickly secured all entrances. Attempts were made to contact the central grid operator located in Bogotá, yet all phone lines remained dead. Within moments, the craft ascended vertically and vanished from sight. No sonic boom heralded its departure, nor was there any noise indicative of acceleration. It simply ceased to be. The power restoration did not occur immediately. It wasn't until the following morning that partial service resumed. When repair teams arrived several hours later, they were taken aback by the aftermath. Entire sections of the external switchgear were incinerated, while wiring within the concrete junction boxes had succumbed to melting, exhibiting signs of exposure to immense electromagnetic heat rather than conventional combustion. The concrete base supporting transformer A6 demonstrated charring and cracking, despite no sign of an internal explosion. Scorch marks outlined the northern perimeter fence of the substation, yet not a single fire had been logged. The internal records were distorted, the black box entangled with corrupted timestamps, sliding from 217 to 2 hours and 21 minutes a.m. An analog paper chart, preserved as a redundancy, noted a current flow spike surpassing 200% of nominal levels, perfectly aligning with the moment that Meneses had described the light pulse. By midday, the incident's news reached the Colombian Electrical Authority, known as ISA. They issued a succinct statement attributing the events to an unexplained equipment malfunction while assuring the public that electrical supply had been restored. Nevertheless, the engineers present understood that the reality was far more peculiar. In the ensuing days, several internal communications circulated between the plant and the ISA headquarters. One memo referenced aerial interference of indeterminate origins, while another cautioned against probing plant personnel regarding the sighting, implying possible disciplinary measures. Meneses, determined to voice the truth, resisted any attempts to silence him. Weeks later, he spoke anonymously to a local journalist from El Países Dali, conveying the details of what he and his colleagues had witnessed. His account remained consistent and rich in technical detail. He asserted that the object had exerted not just an influence on the grid, but had engaged actively with it, perhaps siphoning power. It did not merely observe, he insisted, it sought something. In a rare audio interview for a 1994 documentary focused on Colombian UFOs, Vanka corroborated this sentiment. This was not merely the result of lightning or a malfunctioning transformer. Those were familiar phenomena. This was something orchestrated, something intentional. The public's response varied considerably. Many dismissed the account as hysteria or a mere misinterpretation arising from the blackout, yet others highlighted numerous reports of consistent sightings from residents in Yumbo and the nearby city of Cali that very night. Calls streaming in to local radio stations described a bright orange disk illuminating the sky. At least one amateur video emerged, depicting a light hovering in the vicinity, though its clarity was lacking and its evidence inconclusive. UFO researchers from Bogotá sought out the engineers for interviews, yet none were willing to speak under their real names, save for Manis, who by then had submitted his resignation. He revealed that the internal pressure to retract his story had become too much to bear. Analysis conducted several years later by retired electrical engineer Luis Carranza indicated that the damage observed could not possibly result from a standard surge, short circuit, or overload. His findings were submitted to the Colombian Institute of Electrical Engineering, yet they received no acknowledgement in public discourse. The Colombian government has refrained from launching any official inquiries into the matter. In subsequent years, UFO researchers on an international scale began to reference the Yumbo incident in research concerning electromagnetic interference connected with UFOs, frequently drawing parallels to the Cash Landrum case in Texas and the Rendlesham Forest incident in the United Kingdom. The recurring pattern was disconcertingly familiar: aerial objects, pulse-like emissions, electrical failures, and physical destruction. To this day, the engineers who encountered the event in Yumbo stand firm in their recounting of the experience. Meneses, now enjoying retirement, occasionally consents to interviews, stipulating that no identifying information be revealed. In a correspondence from 2011 with researcher Diego Marquez, he stated emphatically that this was not of this world. He could not ascertain its intentions, but he witnessed it, along with the others. The question lingered. Was the object tapping into the grid, or was the blackout merely an incidental outcome of its presence? Regardless of the truth, the indelible marks it left, both on the power station and in the minds of its witnesses, endure. The case involving Chile's Whitted drew parallels. On the 24th of July, 1948, near Montgomery, Alabama, USA, the cockpit was enveloped in stillness. The world beyond lay cloaked in darkness. It was 2:45 in the morning on that fateful date. Captain Clarence S. Chills, a seasoned World War II veteran and commercial airline pilot, occupied the left seat of his Eastern Airlines DC-3. The aircraft, designated Flight 576, cruised at an altitude of 5,000 feet on its route from Houston to Atlanta. First Officer John B. Whitted sat beside him, his gaze fixed on the crystal-clear sky outside his window. Behind them, 20 passengers slept soundly beneath the soft glow of dim cabin lights, lulled into tranquility by the rhythmic hum of the twin engines. Then, out of the blue, Chills noticed a phenomenon. Initially just a distant point of brilliance, the light quickly expanded, intensifying on the eastern horizon, far more striking than any star. Within seconds, the light grew more brilliant, and the object in question came into sharper focus. Chili's instinctively leaned forward, calling out to his companion, "John, do you see that?" Whitted turned his head just in time to see a colossal structure hurtling towards them, radiantly bright and utterly silent. Time seemed to stand still for both men. As the unearthly vessel sped closer, unmistakable details sharpened into view. It resembled a cylindrical craft akin to a rocket or an aircraft fuselage, conspicuously lacking any visible wings or tail. Its estimated length exceeded 100 feet, perhaps even more. 2 rows of square windows lined the sides, casting a steady bluish-white glow that added to its otherworldly presence. Erupting from the rear, flames in vivid oranges and reds shot out, lending the appearance of a sophisticated propulsion mechanism at work. Then, in the blink of an eye, it abruptly veered right and darted past their aircraft. The sudden jolt sent the DC-3 into a brief turbulence, the object disappearing into the enveloping darkness of night. The encounter unfolded in a matter of 10 seconds, but left a lingering tremor on their nerves. Shaky and still in disbelief, Chili radioed the nearest control tower to document the alarming near miss. There were no scheduled military operations in the vicinity, and the commercial flight paths were completely clear. Neither civilian nor military aircraft were anticipated in that altitude and trajectory. The heightened urgency in the pilot's voice was duly noted. Upon landing in Atlanta just as dawn broke, both Chili and Whitted submitted formal accounts to United States Air Force intelligence. Remarkably, their narratives mirrored one another, almost verbatim. They each independently rendered sketches of the strange craft, a cigar-shaped object with glowing windows, fire streaming from its stern, devoid of any wings or insignias. It had flown alarmingly close, within 1,000 feet of their cockpit, an unacceptable proximity in the absence of a collision alert. Within days, the case was escalated to the desk of Project Sign, the Air Force's inaugural official inquiry into unidentified flying objects. This was not merely another instance of civilians misinterpreting a weather balloon. These were seasoned pilots with former military experience, each boasting thousands of hours aloft, their credibility too significant to easily dismiss. Compounding the mystery was a corroborative report from a passenger. Clarence McKeely, the editor of the American Education Press, had been seated near the front of the cabin and witnessed a phenomenal flash outside just as the encounter occurred. While he did not directly identify the entire object, he verified that the aircraft had shifted violently, disturbing several resting passengers. Project Sign was quick to classify the incident as unexplained. For a time, the testimony from Chili and Whitted became central in their internal discussions. Did some of these sightings indicate advanced craft from beyond the Earth? A noteworthy response came from Dr. J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer affiliated with Ohio State University who served as a consultant for Project Sign. Initially skeptical, Hynek pointed out that the descriptions provided did not align with known types of aircraft, meteors, or celestial phenomena. The orderly arrangement of windows, the horizontal trajectory, and the altitude at which the pilots observed the object negated most natural explanations. However, as public interest in UFOs surged during the summer of 1948, fueled by incidents like the Kenneth Arnold sighting and the Roswell crash of the previous year, the military's narrative began to evolve. General Hoy Vandenberg, the Air Force Chief of Staff, reportedly deemed the project's original speculation of extraterrestrial visitation as lacking sufficient evidence. As a result, the official stance shifted. The Air Force recalibrated its interpretation of the Chili and Whitted case, asserting that the pilots had likely witnessed a fireball meteor. However, both Chili and Whitted vehemently rejected this assessment. A meteor? Chili declared in a subsequent interview. "No, sir. I have seen meteors before. That object had windows." He maintained his position firmly, proclaiming it was both real and solid, demonstrating controlled flight. Whitted supported Chile's assertion, insisting the object had altered its course, executed an agile maneuver, and glided away horizontally. Actions that contradicted the expected behavior of meteors, which typically descend rapidly and burn out within moments. The crucial difference was control. Both men accentuated that the object exhibited flight patterns indicative of intelligent guidance, turning, leveling out, and sustaining altitude. Moreover, the blinding light emanating from the craft did not correspond with meteor trails, which usually exhibit a greenish tinge before disintegrating. The presence of the distinctly illuminated rectangular windows alongside an evident fuselage and the flames trailing from the rear bolstered the argument that this was an apparatus beyond anything known in the inventory of 1948. In the years that followed, the story gradually slipped from public consciousness, yet researchers persisted in revisiting the case as newly declassified files and eyewitness accounts emerged. A notable update arrived in 1969 during the concluding report of Project Blue Book, the Air Force's third and final formal investigation into UFOs. Although many previously undecided instances were recategorized as misinterpretations or fabrications, the Chilean Whitted incident was never entirely debunked. The Air Force's official explanation remained tied to the meteor theory, yet they admitted the case lacked enough substantive data to reach any concrete conclusions. In the decades afterward, numerous aviation historians and UFO enthusiasts continued to defend the case's validity, recognizing it as one of the earliest and most credible pilot sightings recorded. The encounter involving Chile and Whitted stood out not only because of the witnesses' credibility, but also due to the striking technological implications portrayed by the craft itself. It possessed no wings, no tail, and emitted no sound while navigating at astonishing speed. It executed horizontal movements, glowed with an eerie luminescence, appeared to be under intelligent operation, and vanished without leaving a trace behind. For Chile and Whitted, the experience was life-altering. Both aviators persisted in their careers within commercial aviation, resolutely maintaining their accounts without alteration or recantation. Years later, when prompted about the incident, Whitted simply asserted that it transpired. He admittingly lacked a clear understanding of what it was, but insisted it was certainly not of local origin. This case continues to intrigue members of various private research groups, remaining open for exploration. In the 2000s, experts in aviation as well as skeptics revisited this notable case, leveraging modern meteorological data, logs of aircraft movements, and comparisons of pilot accounts. Yet, no conceivable meteorological phenomenon or man-made aircraft could accurately account for the sighting. So what glided past the cockpit of Eastern Airlines Flight 576 in those early hours over Alabama? What accounted for its absence on radar? Why did it escape documentation on any flight log or military itinerary? And what possible motivation would two seasoned pilots have to fabricate such an extraordinary story, devoid of any gain or public display? The Chilean Whitted case stands as one of the few early UFO encounters adept at intertwining credible testimony, supporting evidence, and unresolved enigma. It acted as a catalyst for the military's nascent interest in UFOs, contributed to the establishment of formal investigative agencies, and quietly underpins the vast structure of contemporary sightings. No crashes occurred, no wreckage to document, nor photography to substantiate. Just a fleeting instant in the sky where something magnificent, immense, and inexplicable appeared, only to vanish as abruptly as it had materialized. And two individuals who unwaveringly maintained that they witnessed it. The audio recording from RAF Bentwaters, dated from December 26 to 28, 1980, captures unmistakable moments. The static interrupts the ambient sounds, unmistakably revealing some peculiar, blinking red light in the distance. A voice emerges, low and tense, stating that it is indeed approaching. Click. Another voice asserts with clarity that they are observing what seems to be a beam descending toward the ground. The cassette recorder's timestamp indicates it is now 2 a.m. The voices belong to United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt and his security team, situated deep within the Rendlesham Forest next to RAF Bentwaters, a British base under U.S. control during the Cold War. This marks the second night of UFO sightings that have perplexed military personnel and confounded official narratives for over 4 decades. However, this incident is distinct in that it was recorded live, capturing the event in real time. What transpired over those 3 days in December 1980 would evolve into one of the most rigorously documented UFO encounters in history. Not through radar readings or blurry video footage nor second-hand accounts, but because the deputy commander of the base held a tape recorder in hand and chronicled the entire affair. This wasn't an account from a farmer or civilian recounting unusual lights. This was the second in command of a NATO military base, one housing nuclear arsenal, detailing an encounter with something extraordinary, unexplainable, and seemingly technologically advanced. It all commenced on the night of December 26th, when Airman First Class John Burroughs and Sergeant Bud Steffens observed luminous lights descending into the woods beyond the perimeter fence. Believing an aircraft might have crashed, they alerted command. Personnel were authorized to investigate, with Airman Jim Penn joining the duo. What they encountered defied rational explanation. They reported a triangular craft adorned with luminous panels, approximately 9 feet wide and 6 feet tall, hovering silently just above the forest floor. Penniston approached closely enough to touch the craft's surface. He would later recount having seen strange symbols inscribed along the hull, resembling hieroglyphs. Abruptly, the craft descended vertically among the trees and vanished in an instant. The following day, Penniston found himself plagued by vivid dreams, often involving sequences of binary code that he felt compelled to write down. These notes would later intrigue researchers and ignite years of speculation. Initially, base leadership dismissed the event, but the narrative shifted on the second night. Colonel Charles Halt, initially skeptical, was informed that strange lights were visible again in the woods. Resolute in his intent to resolve the matter, he gathered a team of security personnel equipped with a handheld radiation meter, a night vision scope, and, importantly, a cassette tape recorder. What he captured would come to be known as the Halt tape. Over the span of 18 minutes, the recording details Halt and his team encountering a pulsating red object in the forest. They take radiation readings from the landing site and discover physical depressions in the ground. Subsequently, the object moves silently, weaving between the trees before shooting upward and emitting beams of light, one of which lands directly at their feet. Halt exclaims in astonishment that they are observing what seems to be a beam descending toward the ground, remarking on the unreal quality of the encounter. That night, multiple lights danced across the sky, some performing incredible maneuvers that defy the laws of physics. Halt and his team pursued them through the woods, relaying urgent observations into the recording device. Calm, focused, yet clearly disturbed, the trained officers captured genuine moments of direct, unexplainable contact. This grainy, haunting audio would emerge as one of the most compelling pieces of evidence concerning UFOs. The British Ministry of Defense initially showed scant interest, repeatedly asserting for decades that the incident presented no threat to the nation's security. Yet, documents acquired through Freedom of Information requests later unveiled that the ministry had been quietly monitoring the case, with memos referencing unidentified aerial phenomena over both RAF Bentwaters and adjacent RAF Woodbridge. The United States authorities proved even more elusive. The incident report filed by Halt, known as the Halt Memo, was classified and remained buried for years until finally leaked to the public. This memo detailed a potential unidentified craft sighting, including ground impressions, elevated radiation levels, and visual confirmation from multiple personnel of the United States Air Force. To this day, no explanation has been provided by either government, and the witnesses steadfastly hold to their accounts. Penniston and Burroughs continued to assert their experiences, though their narratives took different paths over the years. Penniston alleged that the craft conveyed messages to him telepathically, whereas Burroughs would later endure health complications and engage in a protracted legal battle with the Veterans Affairs. His case gained weight with the eventual disclosure that RAF Bentwaters indeed housed tactical nuclear weapons at that time, a fact that had previously been denied by both governments. Even more intriguing, Burroughs ultimately received full medical disability benefits for injuries linked to the Rendlesham incident. The court recognized that he had encountered an unidentified phenomenon during his service. This acknowledgement alone represents a rare, albeit indirect, confirmation that something extraordinary transpired in those woods. In 2010, Colonel Halt emerged from years of silence during a conference in Washington, D.C. He made a public declaration that stated this was not merely a product of imagination. He saw it, and many others witnessed it as well. It was undeniably real. He further disclosed that radar operators from RAF Watton tracked a rapid-moving object at the time of the event, though they were instructed to remain quiet. Interest in the story surged again in the 2000s, driven by renewed enthusiasm from UFO researchers and journalists. The British Ministry of Defence released additional documents, many heavily redacted, while continuing to assert that no threat was identified. Nevertheless, the evidence persisted. The Halt tape underwent analysis for authenticity and was confirmed to match the characteristics of recordings from the 1980s era. It was found to be unedited, with ambient sounds from the forest aligning perfectly with the Rendlesham environment. The ground impressions captured at the scene corresponded with a tripod pattern, and the radiation levels measured by Halt's team revealed anomalies above baseline norms. Numerous airmen provided sworn affidavits regarding their experiences, and perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence remains the silence surrounding it all. Neither the U.S. nor U.K. governments have furnished a credible explanation for the events witnessed. No aircraft were reported missing, no experimental flight tests were documented, and the weather conditions were clear. The radar blips were genuine, the audio is authentic, the witnesses are legitimate, and the event itself remains a mystery. Unlike the Roswell incident, there were no materials retrieved. Unlike the Phoenix sighting, there was no widespread civilian observation. However, what sets the Rendlesham incident, and in particular the Halt tape, apart is its immediacy. Listeners can feel the tension, confusion, and wonder as it unfolds in real time. Colonel Halt has since remarked he wished the incident had never occurred, yet it did, and the evidence is undeniably present. Perhaps it is appropriate that this incident, one of the clearest and most documented UFO encounters in contemporary history, transpired not in secrecy but through recorded sound, captured on a humble tape deck carried by a skeptical officer who merely sought the truth. He achieved that goal and took the step of pressing record. On November 7, 2006, another striking sighting occurred at Gate C-17 of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Illinois, USA. It was a brisk gray afternoon at one of the busiest airports globally. On this occasion, the tarmac at Chicago's O'Hare hummed with the routine hustle of airport operations. Jet engines roared while ground crews maneuvered in their bright neon vests, and the runways glistened under an early winter drizzle. Flights arrived and departed seamlessly. Yet, something unusual hovered above Gate C-17. At first, only a handful of airport personnel noticed. A mechanic, walking beneath a United Airlines jet, glanced up and froze. Above Concourse C, amid the overcast sky, a perfectly round metallic object remained suspended, silent and stationary, seemingly observing everything below. There were no lights, no sounds, and no wings visible. It was not an aircraft, at least not any sort they had ever encountered. The mechanic quickly radioed his supervisors, prompting the word to spread swiftly among United personnel. Pilots, ramp workers, and gate agents all began to gaze skyward, some gasping and others pointing in disbelief. One ramp employee later characterized it as a gray-silver disc, distinctly a disc, hovering silently just above their gate. The object lingered stationary just beneath the cloud cover, estimated to be about 1,900 feet high. Then, without any prior warning, it ascended through the clouds with such speed that it created a visible hole in the overcast ceiling. Witnesses described it as if a circular cutout had been made in the sky, revealing a patch of clear blue above the gray expanse. The hole persisted for several minutes before gradually closing with the drifting vapor. In total, at least 12 United Airlines employees reported seeing the object, with the event spanning roughly 5 minutes. No passengers witnessed it, at least not any who came forth afterward. The sighting remained confined to airline and ground crew personnel positioned advantageously near Gate C-17. Initially, discussions surrounding the incident were limited to internal conversations at United Airlines, but by the following day, word had spread beyond their confines. Employees began reaching out to the National UFO Reporting Center, known as NUFORC, and subsequently to the Mutual UFO Network, abbreviated as MUFON. Speculation circulated within aviation circles. The Federal Aviation Administration's response was swift and dismissive. Spokesperson Elizabeth Isham Corey informed the media that the FAA had no record of any unusual objects in the vicinity and had received no radar verification. The official explanation offered was that a weather phenomenon had occurred, a rationale that did not sit well with the witnesses. John Hilovich, a transportation reporter at the Chicago Tribune, caught wind of the story through a source at United and began investigating. His report, published 2 months later in early January 2007, sent shockwaves through the national press. The article was thorough and nuanced, incorporating testimonies from multiple anonymous witnesses and United Airlines employees, while underscoring the FAA's conspicuous reluctance to engage in any investigation. "It's not as if these employees are fabricating their accounts," Hilovich noted during an interview with CNN. "They are credible and remarkably consistent in their observations." His report also unearthed that a United Airlines manager had submitted an internal safety report regarding the incident shortly after its occurrence. Employees recounted being instructed to refrain from discussing the sighting publicly. One pilot who had witnessed the object from the cockpit was prohibited from speaking to the media, but later verified the sighting anonymously to investigators from MUF. The credibility of these witnesses distinguished this case in the minds of many. These individuals were aviation professionals, trained to identify aircraft, track flight patterns, and adhere to stringent protocols. They were not your typical UFO enthusiasts. They were expert observers immersed in one of the most regulated environments globally. Despite numerous Freedom of Information Act requests, the FAA initially resisted releasing records related to the incident. However, persistent endeavors by investigative journalist Leslie Keane and others ultimately compelled the FAA to disclose air traffic audio recordings and internal communications. Although the radar logs indicated no unusual activity, the email exchanges released between United and FAA officials painted a different narrative. Employees from both organizations initially took the sighting seriously. An internal FAA email dated November 8 reported, "A United Airlines ramp employee spotted a spinning disc-shaped object approximately 700 feet above Gate C-17. The object was described as being completely silent and vanished vertically at an astonishing speed." Amid the tension, emails exchanged nervously reflected on the occurrence, with one FAA manager humorously querying whether they truly wanted to address the situation, while another remarked, "They're going to need an alien ID badge if this keeps up." Nonetheless, the FAA maintained its firm stance. Without radar evidence, there would be no investigation, attributing the event to a hole punch cloud, a meteorological phenomenon resulting in an opening in cloud cover due to the falling of ice. Crystals. Yet, meteorologists acquainted with the case swiftly contested this explanation. A hole punch cloud typically develops gradually, not instantaneously, and is usually accompanied by evident ice crystals and light refraction, none of which were reported that day. Furthermore, a hole punch cloud fails to explain the disk that hovered for several minutes prior to creating that opening. Skeptics advanced various alternative hypotheses, including an experimental drone, a misidentified balloon, or a peculiar optical illusion. However, none of these explanations aligned with the behavior, shape, or abrupt departure of the object as recounted by witnesses. Moreover, no military or private organization came forth to take responsibility for anything in the vicinity at that time. This sighting gained significant attention in UFO research circles due to its occurrence in restricted airspace directly over an international airport, an area subjected to stringent monitoring and control. Any unauthorized object loitering near the terminal should have provoked security protocols, FAA alerts, or even a military response. Yet, no such reaction was observed and no satisfactory explanation was ever provided. The integrity of the witnesses, compounded by the FAA's unwillingness to pursue an investigation, led many to suspect either a subtle cover-up or, at the very least, a deliberate ignorance. Aviation regulations are explicit. Unknown aerial objects within controlled airspace represent a potential safety threat and should be documented and scrutinized. Yet in this instance, the involved agencies dismissed the occurrence without officially logging it as an incident. Over the years, the O'Hare sighting has evolved into one of the most frequently referenced examples of credible professional witnesses encountering a UFO in broad daylight at a major transportation hub. It has appeared in documentaries, books, and aviation conferences. The incident was even extensively deliberated during public hearings on unidentified aerial phenomena decades later, with pilots and officials leveraging it as a prime illustration of the necessity for improved reporting procedures. To this day, none of the United employees who publicly shared their experiences have wavered in their accounts. Many have declined additional interviews, preferring to allow the facts to convey their own narrative. A select few retired and, in subsequent years, felt freer to discuss their observations. One ramp worker, who chose to speak under the pseudonym Joe R., reminisced during a podcast interview. It was present. I witnessed it. Everyone in proximity observed it. We were not imagining things. It hovered directly above Gate C-17, as tangible as the planes we handle daily. And then it was gone. The circular gap in the clouds, which formed when the object ascended, was also observed by passengers aboard nearby flights. A United pilot reported the odd sight to the control tower, bewildered by the perfectly symmetrical clearing. Archived weather data from that day confirmed no natural causes for a sudden alteration in cloud cover, while FAA radar purportedly failed to capture any unusual activity, as the public was led to believe. Efforts in subsequent years to employ CGI in replicating the visuals aimed at determining whether a hoax could clarify the eyewitness accounts, yet none have succeeded in replicating the strange precision and silence observed during the actual incident. Today, as travelers bustle past Gate C-17 at O'Hare Airport, they are oblivious to the fact that above that very spot on a chilly afternoon in 2006, something hovered defiantly against the laws of physics, silently observed by a dozen seasoned professionals who have never ceased to recall what they witnessed. Whether it was a drone, an avant-garde aircraft, or something beyond this world remains an enigma. But amid the orchestrated frenzy of one of America's busiest airports, enveloped in the sounds of concrete, radio chatter, and sleek glass terminals, the sky momentarily opened in silence, and something inexplicable ascended. The Tolman House Poltergeist UFO Link, 1987, Horicon, Wisconsin, USA. The trouble began with a bunk bed. Early in 1987, Alan and Debbie Tolman acquired a second-hand wooden bunk bed from a local thrift shop in Horicon, Wisconsin, intending it for their two young children. The frame was sturdy and ordinary, resembling thousands of others that filled homes across the country. After assembling it in the children's room, they returned to their daily routines, blissfully unaware of the unsettling events that lay ahead. However, shortly after the bunk bed entered their lives, the Tolman household was thrust into a nightmare of phenomena that would spiral into one of the most bizarre and troubling cases of domestic unrest conceivable. This occurrence would later raise intriguing questions concerning the connection between physical poltergeist activity and inexplicable aerial events. Within the unassuming single-story house at 1410 Larrabee Street, occurrences escalated to the point that even the most weathered police officers summoned to investigate found themselves too shaken to return after their first Encounter. For the next 9 months, the Tolman family endured unexplained voices, shifting objects, malfunctioning electronics, and increasingly hostile phenomena that resisted every rational explanation. The initial signs were subtle, almost dismissible. A clock radio situated in the children's room inexplicably powered on and off, switching stations randomly or blaring loudly at unexpected moments. Alarm clocks buzzed at inappropriate times, even when disconnected from their power source. Convinced that they had simply purchased faulty devices, the family acquired replacements, yet the disturbances persisted. Then came the voices. It began with their son, who reported hearing someone call his name in the stillness of night, even during moments when the rest of the household lay asleep. Before long, their daughter began experiencing similar phenomena. She would hear low, indistinct whispers hovering near her bedside. One fateful night, while Alan was working a late shift, Debbie found herself home alone with the children when a deep male voice reverberated through the house, seemingly materializing from nowhere. Apprehensive, Debbie searched each room, discovering no one. All doors remained locked and windows were undisturbed. It was not long before doors began to slam shut without any apparent source. Shadows flitted down hallways in the eerie isolation of the house. Their youngest child spoke of an ugly woman lurking in the corner of her room. Initially, the parents dismissed it as mere figments of childlike imagination. That perception shifted dramatically one fateful evening when Alan himself witnessed the apparition. A tall, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes drifted silently across the living room. Instinctively, he chased after it, believing intruders had invaded their home, but the figure vanished, leaving no trace. Neighbors also became aware of the inexplicable happenings. Lights flickered in the Tolman residence even amidst clear skies. Pets hesitated to approach the yard, and one neighbor recounted hearing screams originating from the home on a night when the family was absent. However, the incident that pushed the family to their breaking point happened directly to Alan Tolman. One evening, after enduring yet another series of disturbances, he remained awake, reading his Bible and praying in the living room, seeking to restore tranquility to his household. He later recounted that a red-orange mist began to coalesce in the hallway, morphing into a towering figure that stood over 6 feet tall. The entity glared at him intensely before retreating into the wall of the bedroom. Later that very night, a voice ominously intoned, "You're dead." That marked the last evening Alan Tolman ever spent within those walls, as the family fled at dawn to seek refuge with relatives. However, rumors concerning the haunting had already begun to circulate. Friends, neighbors, and even off-duty police officers flocked to the house, eager to validate the claims they had heard. Some could only bear a brief time inside before refusing to return. Officers from the Moroccan Police Department, 3 in total, one of whom had logged over 15 years on the force, later affirmed that something supernatural had transited through the home. They articulated an overwhelming sense of dread, sudden drops in temperature, and sounds they couldn't correlate to any visible cause. One officer who volunteered to spend a night in the house reportedly fled in terror after less than an hour, relaying to his colleagues, "There's something in there. I'm not going back." Reverend Wayne Doratz from St. Stephen's Lutheran Church was subsequently called in by the troubled family. After exploring the home and speaking to the children, he agreed to conduct a blessing. Yet the disturbances persisted. Then, as abruptly as they had begun, they ceased altogether. When the family removed and incinerated the bunk bed, the phenomena vanished completely. Following their relocation, they never encountered another incident. Debbie Tolman later articulated her conviction that the bed itself was the source of the disturbances. Whether it harbored something sinister or acted merely as a catalyst remains unclear. But upon its departure, the house fell into an uncanny silence. What distinguishes the Tolman case, beyond its intensity and frequency, is the remarkable overlap with reports of UFO activity occurring in the vicinity at that same time. During the period of unrest, several residents from Moroccan and Dodge County reported seeing strange lights in the sky, including a luminous object hovering at the town's outskirts on a frigid January night. Eyewitness accounts of fast-moving, silent crafts exhibiting erratic flight patterns emerged, documented by local news outlets and corroborated by various law enforcement officials. One anonymous officer described how two separate patrol vehicles witnessed these peculiar aerial lights within hours of the Tolman family's final night in their home. Although no direct correlation between the lights and the household was ever confirmed, numerous researchers and authors investigating the case pondered if the disturbances might be tied to a broader phenomenon where UFO sightings coincided with poltergeist occurrences. In 1992, the television show Unsolved Mysteries featured the Tolman case in one of its most highly rated episodes, showcasing dramatized reenactments derived from interviews with police officers, clergy, and neighbors. Though the family opted to remain unnamed during their on-screen appearance, the episode ignited a significant surge of interest surrounding the case. Nevertheless, the Tolmans chose not to exploit this newfound publicity. They refrained from giving paid interviews and turned down any follow-up inquiries, clearly exhibiting signs of trauma and a desire to avoid rehashing their experience for public spectacle. Years later, when skeptics revisited the tale, they unearthed no evidence of deceit or any ulterior financial motives. The family had never gained any financial benefit from the incident. In fact, they appeared to have endured social and emotional repercussions due to its lasting impact. Investigators recognized that the Moroccan Police Department retained internal records concerning the case, and several former officers continued to privately affirm the veracity of what transpired within that home. Contrary to many sensational hauntings or poltergeist claims, the Tolman case is distinguished by its brief timeline, the absence of prior disturbances, and its abrupt conclusion following the destruction of a single object, the bunk bed. Psychologists analyzing the family's behavior pointed out that while emotional stress could potentially lead to hallucinations or suggestibility, the statistical likelihood of multiple individuals, including children, officers, clergy, and neighbors, all experiencing synchronized delusions across distinct events and time frames, seemed improbable. Photographic evidence, audio documentation, and definitive physical proof of the occurrences inside 1410 Larrabee Street remain elusive. However, there exist sworn testimonies corroborating eyewitness accounts and officers who, decades later, still hesitate to discuss their experiences within that residence. The Tolman house has since come under the ownership of different families, none of whom have reported any further disturbances. The house itself quietly occupies a suburban street in a town that prefers to overlook, if not forget, what occurred there. For some, it lingers as an unresolved haunting. For others, merely a psychological enigma, and for a rare few, a potential convergence of two unexplained phenomena. In most poltergeist incidents, the disturbances tend to revolve around an individual, typically a child or adolescent experiencing emotional distress. However, in this unique situation, the activity appeared to emanate from an object. The brief yet intense overlap with unidentified aerial sightings remains a mystery. No one ever managed to discover the origin of the bunk bed itself. No serial numbers, manufacturers, or retail sources have ever been traced. Acquired from a local secondhand dealer whose inventory derived from auctions and estate sales, it remains unknown whether its past influenced the strange events surrounding it. Perhaps this ambiguity constitutes the most unsettling aspect of the Tolman House saga, that a seemingly harmless and commonplace item, a child's bunk bed, could become the epicenter of months filled with terror, transcending the boundaries of a single family and embedding itself in the community's memory. The official case file remains closed. No crime was ever recorded. No satisfactory explanation of the phenomena was issued. And like the bed itself, the records have long since vanished. Yet, inquire with any officer who witnessed the events, and they will affirm that something was undeniably present in that household, an experience they have no desire to revisit. Moving ahead to the Japan Airlines radar mystery, on the 17th of November, 1986, over the eastern Alaskan airspace of the United States, the sky was clear at cruising altitude, presenting nothing on the radar save for empty air. Japan Airlines Flight 1628, a Boeing 747 cargo freighter, had been in the air for several hours, making its routine journey from Paris to Tokyo with a scheduled stop in Anchorage. Aboard were 3 crew members: Captain Kenju Taruchi, an experienced pilot and former fighter pilot with over 10,000 hours of flying time, First Officer Takanori Tamafuji, and Flight Engineer Yoshio Tsukuba. Having entered United States airspace over Alaska without difficulty, they were flying at 35,000 feet when, at 5:11 p.m. local time, as they neared the eastern frontier of the Alaskan interior, something unusual appeared on their radar screen. An object was observed moving erratically. Soon thereafter, the crew verified the sighting visually. 2 small, round, glowing crafts were detected, flying in close formation. The lights did not blink as typical aircraft lights do, and their maneuvers diverged greatly from any known movements in commercial or military aviation. The luminous objects positioned themselves off the port side of the aircraft, initiating a pacing formation alongside the 747. In disbelief, the crew surveyed the objects as they executed sudden vertical ascents and rapid decelerations, actions that no known aircraft could perform during that era. Following this display, the objects assumed a position directly in front of the Boeing, suggesting they were escorting the plane. Captain Taruchi later detailed the experience in official reports and interviews. He characterized the objects as 2 smaller vessels flanking one large mothership. The smaller crafts appeared rectangular and emitted an intense burst of light that momentarily blazed through the cockpit, disrupting the visibility of flight instruments. The heat from the light could even be felt on Taruchi's face through the cockpit glass. He likened their appearance to something straight out of science fiction, noting that they executed maneuvers that no conventional aircraft could replicate. As the situation escalated, about 10 minutes after the initial sighting, a massive dark object emerged behind the aircraft. Taruchi depicted it as enormous, comparable in size to 2 aircraft carriers and shaped like a walnut, featuring an oblong form with visible panels or structures on its surface. It loomed closely behind the 747, maintaining a consistent proximity. Despite the nighttime conditions, the moonlight allowed the crew to discern the object's outline clearly. Both the flight engineer and first officer corroborated the sighting visually. At 5:19 p.m., Captain Taruchi contacted the Federal Aviation Administration Air Route Traffic Control Center in Anchorage and reported the anomaly. Initially, controllers detected nothing unusual on their radar. However, within minutes, they began to perceive a primary return, a non-transponder-based radar echo that appeared near Flight 1628's position. The Federal Aviation Administration promptly initiated efforts to corroborate the observations. Military radar at Elmendorf Air Force Base, along with nearby radar installations, began detecting sporadic signals that aligned with an unidentified object following the Japanese flight. Air traffic controllers inquired whether the crew wished to alter their altitude or engage in evasive maneuvers. Agreeing to the suggestion, Captain Taruchi attempted to descend and made several course adjustments to evade the mysterious craft, yet it remained persistently in pursuit of them. In response, controllers dispatched a United Airlines aircraft and a United States Air Force C-130 cargo plane to the affected area for visual verification. The C-130 reported a lack of visual contact, but by that point, the enigmatic objects had vanished from both sight and radar screens. Despite the unsettled experience, the Japanese crew maintained their composure and continued their journey towards Anchorage. They landed without any difficulties, yet the narrative surrounding the incident was only just beginning to unfold. An immediate and comprehensive post-flight investigation ensued. Captain Taruchi meticulously documented the encounter through detailed reports and diagrams that illustrated the appearance and movements of the unidentified craft. His fellow crew members provided corroborating accounts, affirming the primary details of the sighting. The FAA launched a rigorous inquiry that included the analysis of radar data, cockpit voice recordings, and interviews with both air traffic controllers and military personnel. The resulting data confirmed that, indeed, a primary radar return had been logged in proximity to Flight 1628 during the time frame of the incident. Unlike a typical radar return from a commercial airline with an active transponder, this particular return lacked any identification and did not correspond to any scheduled air traffic. The radar findings further validated the accounts of the Japanese crew, evidencing that an object had been trailing them for over 30 minutes and spanning several hundred miles of airspace. John Callahan, who served as the FAA's Division Chief of Accidents and Investigations at the time, became directly involved in the inquiry. He publicly disclosed that a meeting took place between officials from the FAA, CIA, FBI, and Department of Defense shortly after the incident. During this classified session, the radar data, voice recordings, and testimonies from the crew were thoroughly examined. According to Callahan, CIA representatives urged those present not to disclose any details regarding the event, asserting that it simply did not happen. The data and tapes were subsequently confiscated, and a significant portion of the investigation was relegated to obscurity for many years. Nevertheless, Callahan retained copies of the original evidence, which included the radar tapes and voice recordings. In the 2000s, he made this material public, thereby affirming the legitimacy of the original event and the subsequent federal response. Despite the substantial evidence supporting his account, Captain Taruchi encountered repercussions. Japan Airlines grounded him shortly after the incident due to the heightened public interest surrounding the case, assigning him to a desk position in spite of his exemplary safety record and vast experience. While the stated reason for his reassignment did not cite the incident, many speculated that his credibility had suffered not from a mistake, but from his willingness to report something that remained unexplained by official discourse. The media extensively covered the incident, garnering both national and international attention. Newspapers in both the United States and Japan reported on the story, while prominent television networks aired segments that featured translations of Taruchi's statements alongside radar footage. The case resurrected itself in 1987, when the FAA formally acknowledged the authenticity of the radar data and voice recordings. A spokesperson confirmed detection of something on radar near Flight 1628, but emphasized that conclusions regarding its nature could not be established. UFO researchers celebrated the Japan Airlines radar incident as one of the most thoroughly documented cases in history, merging credible pilot testimony with real-time communications from the FAA, radar data from both civilian and military sources, and the palpable reactions from the crew on board. Few UFO encounters boast such a blending of observational and instrumental data, particularly within controlled airspace monitored by multiple agencies. Critics proposed alternative explanations, some asserting that Taruchi had mistakenly identified the planet Jupiter or reflections on the cockpit's glass. Others hypothesized weather anomalies, such as ice crystals or reflections from far-off ground sources. However, these conjectures failed to account for the corroborating radar data, the sustained visual tracking by all three crew members, and the vivid descriptions of the close proximity to the highly structured maneuvering craft, particularly the enormous mothership reported behind the plane. Even among military and aviation professionals, the case remained an enigma. Former FAA official John Callahan criticized the government's decision to obscure the specifics of the event, arguing that the implications for air safety demanded transparency. In subsequent years, Captain Taruchi continued to uphold his account. In rare interviews, he reiterated that he had indeed witnessed a physical, intelligently controlled entity, one that responded to his aircraft's movements, maintained formation, and emitted intense light and heat. As a military-trained aviator as well as a commercial pilot, he affirmed that his training equipped him to recognize various aircraft silhouettes and behaviors, declaring that what he encountered transcended anything he had ever experienced. The Japan Airlines radar case persists as a distinct outlier in the annals of UFO encounters worldwide, not due to vagueness, but rather because of its remarkable precision. Unlike incidents characterized solely by eyewitness accounts, This event was meticulously recorded, cataloged, and scrutinized by multiple agencies, only to be quietly relegated to obscurity. To this day, the raw radar footage remains exceedingly rare, and much of the government's internal deliberations surrounding the incident has yet to be declassified. Nevertheless, what is known stands compelling in its own right. A cadre of trained aviators observed something enormous and maneuvering, which was detectable on military radar. It was reported in real time, pursued them for nearly 400 miles, and then simply vanished. The legacy of Flight 1628 endures not within any official databases, but within aviation logs, radar archives, and the recollections of a pilot who gazed into the Alaskan night sky and beheld something he was never meant to see, yet remains entirely unexplained. Thank you for tuning in to Night Archive. We sincerely hope that the gentle currents of the wind have lifted you into tranquil slumber, perhaps guiding you toward the more surreal corners of the mind. Should this resonate with you, we encourage you to express your appreciation through a like, subscribe, and share your musings in the comments section. What unusual encounter do you believe the wind should carry forth in whispered tales?